Hi guys, and welcome to Quiet Voice Podcast channel. Tonight we step into the heavy river air of Louisiana in 1855, where the sugar country wakes long before sunrise and the darkness itself seems to carry orders. You stand near a plantation lane while fog drifts low over the fields, and everything feels damp enough to cling to your eyelashes. Somewhere beyond the trees, kettles will soon hiss, mules will stamp, and cane knives will begin their dry whisper through the stalks. It is a landscape that can look almost beautiful in the half-light, which is rude, honestly, because beauty here works for the wrong side. The grand house sits raised and quiet, the cabins crouch close to the earth, and the whole place waits for labour to begin again. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and let the river mist close around you as you begin to see what survival means on one of the harshest sugar plantations in Louisiana. The first thing you notice is the smell. It is not one smell, but many. Wet soil, stale smoke, animal musk, a faint sweetness drifting from old cane pulp left near the works. The Mississippi is close enough that the air carries its muddy breath into everything, settling on wood, cloth, skin, and sleep. Even before the sun rises, your shirt feels slightly damp at the collar, and the rough cloth on your shoulders rubs against skin already tender from labour. The quarters are still dim, a few faint glows pulse behind cracks in cabin walls where coals have been coaxed back to life. These cabins are usually built of wood, plain and hurried, with dirt floors in many cases and only the simplest furniture inside. A bed frame, maybe, pegs on a wall, a pot blackened by repeated use, a stool that wobbles if you lean too hard. Several people often share a single cabin, because comfort is not part of the accounting system. Bodies are. You wake not because you are rested, but because the plantation wakes you. A horn, a bell, a shouted order, a knock, a habit drilled so deeply that your eyes open seconds before the sound arrives. Sleep on a sugar estate is never quite your own. It belongs to the crop, to the season, to the count of acres and hands and boiling time. During grinding season, especially, the work can continue through the night because cut cane begins losing its value if it sits too long before crushing. Sugar punishes delay. That fact hangs over the day like a threat. So you rise, your feet meet the floor, cool and gritty. Someone nearby coughs, a child murmurs and turns. Another person bends over embers, feeding them splinters, then larger bits of wood, until a weak orange light swells and reveals faces in pieces, an elbow, a cheekbone, the shine in tired eyes. You hear the soft rustle of hands feeling for clothes in the dark. And then the sharper sounds of morning begin. A pot lid, a whispered warning not to wake a baby, the scrape of a stool, someone clearing a throat and spitting into the dust outside. Breakfast, if it comes, is small and practical. Cornmeal is common. Pork may appear when rations allow it, often salted, often hard, often more promise than plenty. Molasses sometimes sweetens the mouth, which is almost funny when you live among endless sugar and still know hunger so well. Plantation records from Louisiana show that owners often calculated rations with cold precision, measuring out food as if a person could be maintained like a mule or a boiler. Yet no record book can capture the ache of beginning heavy labour on too little. You step outside into air touched by the last of the night. The sky is dark blue, turning grey. Dew beads on weeds along the packed earth path. Somewhere a rooster tries to sound important. It does not improve the mood. A line of cabins stands low and plain, and beyond them lie the fields, stretching in ordered rows that seem to vanish into mist. Sugarcane is tall, thick, and sharp-edged, and even standing still it looks unfriendly. It is a crop that asks for enormous labour. Planting, hoeing, ditching, weeding, cutting, hauling, feeding the mill. Everything about it is heavy. You join the movement of people walking toward the day's work, and the silence among them has texture. It is not empty. It carries calculation. Who is sick? Who is pregnant? Who took a whipping yesterday? Who might manage to slip an extra sweet potato from a garden patch tonight? Who is strong enough to help someone weaker? You learn very quickly that survival depends not only on your own endurance, but on reading the needs and moods of others with great care. As the light grows, the plantation arranges itself in full view. The main house rises above the landscape with its galleries and shade, built to catch breezes that do not seem intended for you. Nearby stand the work buildings, the mill, the boiling house, sheds, stables, storage rooms, and wagon areas. On many Louisiana sugar estates, these structures form the true centre of the operation. Cotton plantations often spread their labour across vast picking fields, but sugar required intense coordination and expensive machinery. That made sugar plantations some of the most capital-heavy enterprises in the slave South, and often among the most punishing. Owners invested in rollers, kettles, engines, and land drainage, then tried to squeeze every possible ounce of labour from enslaved people to make those investments pay. The overseer appears sooner or later. He often arrives on horseback, because cruelty apparently enjoys elevation. You feel his presence before he speaks. Men like him move through the morning with practiced authority, watching posture, speed, and expression. A person who looks tired may be called lazy. A person who looks back may be called insolent. A person who stumbles may be called careless. The rules are made to shift, which is useful if the goal is fear. You keep your face still. That itself is work. The field road is rutted and damp, and wagon wheels have carved deep grooves where water gathers after rain. Mosquitoes rise from ditches. Frogs go quiet as people pass. The cane leaves make a dry brushing sound when wind moves over them. It would be soothing in another life. Here it sounds like a warning whispered by thousands of blades. When you brush against the stalks, the edges can slice the skin, leaving thin cuts on wrists and forearms that sting when sweat reaches them. The labour begins with motion that soon becomes rhythm. Cut, strip, lift, stack, walk, bend, turn, repeat. Even outside harvest, cane culture demands back-breaking effort. Fields must be hoed and kept clear. Water must be managed because Louisiana's lowlands can flood or rot crops if drainage fails. Ditches matter, levees matter, weather matters. Too much rain, too little warmth, a bad frost, a broken mill, a delay in hauling. Any of these can spoil a season. Historians still argue over exactly how much the brutal pace of sugar labour in Louisiana was shaped by the crop itself, and how much by owners who used the crop as an excuse for maximum violence. Either way, the result in your body feels the same. By sunrise, the sky turns pale gold at the edges, though the beauty of it barely reaches the ground. Sweat begins at the neck, then spreads across your back. The cane field smells greener now, freshly cut stems releasing a raw, watery sweetness. Mud sticks to your shoes or bare feet. Depending on what you have, your hands tighten around the tool handle until the grain presses into your palm. Blisters rise, burst, harden, and return. The body learns, the body complains, the body goes on. Around you, other lives move with equal strain. A man works with one shoulder stiff from an old injury. A woman carries herself with careful balance because she is nursing a child between shifts of labour. An older person keeps pace through knowledge rather than speed, conserving motion, wasting nothing. Children too young for full-field labour still absorb the plantation through errands, watching, waiting, carrying, learning what adults wish they did not have to learn. Enslaved children in Louisiana often began work early, sometimes in small tasks, sometimes more, and the boundary between childhood and labour was thin enough to tear by accident. Sound builds gradually, cane knives striking, a cart axle groaning, mules snorting through leather tack, a shouted order from far across the rows, birds lifting out of the reeds. Then the mill begins to stir in earnest, and its sounds are different. deeper, mechanical, relentless. Rollers turning, belts moving, wood knocking against iron. Once the grinding starts during harvest, the plantation seems to breathe through the mill. Even from a distance, you can feel that pull, as if the whole estate exists to feed stalks into a mouth that never closes. There is a strange little tidbit that people sometimes miss when they imagine sugar plantations. The waste cane fibre left after crushing, called bagasse, did not simply vanish in a dramatic cloud of misery. It was often dried and burned as fuel in the furnaces, which meant yesterday's crushed stalks could help boil today's juice. Nothing useful was meant to escape the system. Even leftovers were drafted into service. It is efficient in a grim, almost offended way. Even the trash gets a job. By mid-morning the warmth thickens. Sunlight slips over the fields and begins pressing down in earnest. Gnats collect at your face. Your shoulders ache. Your lower back develops that dull, hot line of pain that never quite leaves. Work crews are often divided with careful hierarchy, and drivers, enslaved men placed in authority under white supervision, may be used to enforce pace on others. This arrangement poisons relationships by design. The plantation likes to make pressure travel downward. It saves energy at the top. You steal small measurements of the world as you work. The brightness on spider webs stretched between cane leaves, the smell of wood smoke lingering from the quarters, the feel of sweat cooling for one brief second when a breeze crosses the field, a hawk circling high over the riverland. These tiny notices do not free you, but they keep part of your mind from being entirely swallowed. Attention can be a form of shelter. So can memory. Many black people in Louisiana in 1855 were American-born, while others had parents or grandparents who carried memories from Africa, the Caribbean, or other parts of the South. Louisiana's culture itself had layers: French, Spanish, Anglo-American, African, Creole, Catholic, Protestant, riverbound, market-driven, and violently entangled in enslaved quarters, words, songs, foodways, healing practices, and beliefs mixed and adapted under terrible pressure. You may hear speech shaped by several worlds at once. You may hear a hymn one moment and a joke the next. You may hear someone mutter a proverb while tying a headcloth or trimming a tool handle. None of this appears in the planter's neat inventory, yet it is part of the real plantation. The sun climbs higher. Someone near you wipes a sleeve across the face and keeps going. Another straightens slowly, hands pressed into the small of the back, then bends again without comment. Hunger begins its quiet gnawing. Thirst becomes a private obsession. Water, when available, may be warm and slightly muddy, carried in barrels or drawn from places that do not invite confidence. Still, you drink because there is no noble version of dehydration. Only headache, weakness, and danger. A field hand glances toward the house, then back to work. In that glance sits a whole system: white wealth and black exhaustion, shade and exposure, measured silver and cracked bowls, leisure on one porch, command in another. Yet the landscape also contains cracks too small for power to notice, a whispered prayer, a look of warning, a handoff of food, a joke so dry it almost disappears. Gentle sarcasm survives here because dignity is stubborn. Someone mutters that the planter loves sugar so much he would probably marry a barrel of molasses if the law allowed it. Nobody laughs loudly. A few shoulders shake. That is enough. By late morning, the fog has burned away, leaving the horizon clearer. The river road glints in places where wheels have polished mud into hardness. The plantation bell may mark time, though your body already knows it in soreness. You smell hot grass now, and the stronger scent of cane juice from wagons moving toward the works. Bees drift where sweetness leaks. Flies become bolder. Every living thing seems to understand that sugar draws attention. You understand something else. This place is engineered to make survival difficult, but not impossible. Impossible things do not last. People do, through skill, caution, memory, humour, prayer, and one another. people do, not untouched, not unbroken, but living. The fact matters. And as the day settles fully onto the plantation, with its noise, weight, smells, and disciplined cruelty, you stand in that fact with the sun on your neck, the taste of cornmeal still faint in your mouth, and the sharp leaves of cane brushing your arms like paper knives. Morning is over now, the labour is real, the estate is awake, and you're awake inside it, seeing clearly how the day begins for black Americans forced to survive the sugar world of Louisiana in 1855. The cane field closes around you like a green wall built from knives. By the time the light has fully settled over the plantation, the rows seem taller than they first appeared, thick with stalks rising above your head and leaves arching outward in hard, fibrous sprays. Sugar cane is not graceful up close. From a distance it can look soft in the breeze, almost feathery in its movement, as if nature briefly decided to decorate the low country. Then you step into it and discover the lie. The leaves cut at the wrists and neck. The stalks crowd your path. The ground beneath them is uneven, hot, and often slick with mud where water lingers in furrows. You work where the air barely moves. That is one of the strange torments of the field. Open sky stretches overhead, yet inside the rows the breeze often disappears. Heat collects between the stalks and stays there, trapped around your body like a heavy blanket no one asked for. Sweat runs down your temples and along your spine until your clothes cling to you. The fabric chafes with every reach and bend. Bits of cane fuzz stick to damp skin, and small nicks from the leaf edges begin to burn as salt works into them. The labour itself has a harsh rhythm. Cut low, strip leaves, gather stalks, clear the ground, lift the bundle, shift your footing, keep moving. During harvest, each motion must follow quickly enough to satisfy the overseer and the demands of the mill. Cane is not cotton, where bowls can wait on the plant while fields are picked in sequence. Once sugar cane is ready, delay costs money, and planters think about money the way preachers think about salvation, constantly, and with more passion than seems healthy. Each crew has its place in the process. Strong field hands swing knives and cut the stalks near the base. Others strip the leaves, top the cane, and prepare it for loading. Wagons move in and out where the ground allows, pulled by mules whose harnesses creak and jingle as they strain. The drivers shout, the wheels bump over ruts, and the cut cane accumulates in neat, urgent piles. On large Louisiana plantations, labour during sugar harvest had to be coordinated with unusual precision. The crop had to move from field to mill quickly, because the juice inside the stalks began changing as soon as the cane was cut. That single fact gave every order an extra edge. You feel it in the pace. Nobody needs to explain it twice. When the overseer rides the edge of the field, he watches not only hands and posture, but also the growing distance between the cutters and the wagons. He reads stacks the way a merchant reads a ledger. Too much cut cane waiting means danger. Too little arriving at the mill means waste. The plantation wants constant motion, and the people trapped inside it become the moving parts. The sound of cutting is oddly dry. Steel slicing fibrous stalk, leaves snapping loose, bundles thudding down, boots scraping dirt, human breathing, heavier as the hours pass. When several dozen people work in neighbouring rows, the noises overlap into a steady, scraping pulse. From a distance it might almost sound orderly. Up close it feels closer to exhaustion wearing a uniform. Your hands learn the shape of the knife handle. The grip presses grooves into the skin and raises fresh blisters where older calluses cracked. A dull blade is dangerous because it drags and twists. A sharp blade is dangerous because it does exactly what it is told. Either way, the tool asks for respect. One bad angle, one moment of weakness, one stalk slipping under your foot, and flesh opens fast. Plantation records and later recollections show injuries were common during cane cutting, from sliced fingers to deeper wounds. Though owners often treated damaged people as temporary inconveniences rather than human beings in pain, some workers wrap hands with cloth. Some bind old cuts with strips torn from worn garments. Some say nothing and keep going because complaint does not lighten labour here. It only reveals vulnerability to people eager to exploit it. You become careful with silence. Too much may look sullen, too little may invite attention. So you learn the narrow path between them, where you answer when required. Keep your head turned at the proper angle, and let your real thoughts live elsewhere. The sun rises higher and begins to flatten everything. The sky grows white at the edges. Shadows shorten. Moisture lifts from the ground in a smell that mixes crushed greenery, warm mud, and the faint sourness of standing water in ditches. Louisiana's sugarlands required extensive drainage, and many plantations cut canals and trenches to move water off the fields. The landscape could be rich, but it also needed constant management, especially near the river's broad floodplain. You see that management everywhere in embankments, ditches, and roads shaped by human force. The land has been taught to serve, just as the people have, though neither does so willingly. A bird calls somewhere above the cane, brief and liquid. For a moment it sounds like another world. Then someone shouts for a wagon and the spell breaks. A stalk hits your shin. Mud clings to your ankle. A fly finds the wet corner of your eye. The day resumes its usual opinions. Hunger arrives early in work like this. It settles first as hollowness, then as irritation, then as a slow weakness in the arms. Your stomach tightens and loosens in waves. Food on sugar plantations was usually issued as ration rather than abundance. Commonly cornmeal, pork, sometimes molasses, and whatever people could add through gardens, fishing, trapping, or small acts of exchange. The irony remains bitter. You labour inside one of the richest sugar regions in the world and still dream about enough to eat. That detail alone says more about slavery than 1,000 speeches. Around midday there may be a short pause, though pause is a generous word for swallowing something quickly while standing in heat. A bit of cornbread, cold mush, salt pork if fortune has not entirely lost your address, water from a shared container, warm enough to feel disappointing before it even reaches your mouth. Still, the first swallow revives you slightly. You feel it move through your chest and belly like a small, ordinary miracle. You do not sit for long. The field does not love lingering. Nearby, someone mutters a joke about the plantation feeding people just enough to keep them from haunting the owner while he's still alive. It is dark humour. Yes, but dark humour grows well in dark places. Another person snorts once, quickly, eyes still lowered. Even tiny laughter feels risky, almost luxurious, yet it helps. A human voice shaped by wit rather than command reminds you that the mind is still your own in some inward chamber. Children and older people may be assigned different tasks depending on the plantation, the season, and their strength. Some carry water, some gather dropped cane, some pull weeds or help in smaller chores nearer the quarters or work yards. Plantation labour was graded and categorised in many places, but those categories did not soften the truth. Childhood here was interrupted by usefulness. Age did not guarantee gentleness either. Enslaved elders often worked as long as they physically could, and sometimes longer than that, because the system did not retire anyone out of gratitude. The afternoon heat becomes a physical weight. It presses behind your eyes and settles on the shoulders. The cane rows shimmer slightly where sun strikes them. Your shirt dries in places only to become wet again moments later. Dust forms where the ground is baked hard, while wetter patches remain slick enough to steal your footing. The body must constantly adjust. Short step in the mud, longer step at the ditch, bend from the knees when the back threatens revolt. Shift the knife to the other hand when one palm feels flayed. Nobody calls this expertise, but it is. Survival creates craftsmen of endurance. A curious detail sometimes noted by travellers was how fast a practised cane cutter could move when forced by necessity and skill. The speed could seem astonishing to outsiders who saw only the motion and not the punishment behind it. Efficiency in the field often came not from ease, but from repetition pressed into muscle until the body acted almost before thought. That is one of slavery's ugliest tricks. It tries to turn adaptation into approval, as if becoming good at surviving violence somehow excuses the violence itself. It does not. The overseer circles again. Horse sweat reaches you before his voice does, sharp and animal, mixed with leather and dust. He pauses near a row where someone has slowed from fatigue or dizziness. What follows may be a barked threat, an insult, a demand for more speed, or worse. Punishment on Louisiana plantations varied by owner and overseer, but the threat of whipping was deeply woven into field labor. Some planters prided themselves on order, which usually meant they had found efficient ways to terrorize people while keeping records that sounded calm and managerial. Historians still debate how much planters believed their own paternal language and how much it functioned as a mask for pure economic brutality. In the field, the distinction feels academic. Fear has texture here. It tightens the jaw. It shortens the breath. It moves from one person to another without a word, quick as a change in weather. Yet fear is not the only thing moving through the rows. There is also mutual notice. One worker nudges a dropped bundle closer to another with the toe of a shoe. Someone quietly takes the heavier side of a load for one more trip. A glance warns of the overseer's approach. Another glance asks whether a person can continue. These gestures are tiny, almost invisible. That is why they matter. Large kindness gets punished. Small kindness survives. You start to understand the field as a place of knowledge, not the kind stored in books or ledgers, though the planter trusts those greatly. Another kind, the knowledge of when rain is coming by the smell of the air, the knowledge of which patch of ground hides holes under the cane trash, the knowledge of how to strip leaves with fewer cuts, the knowledge of who can be trusted with a whispered word and who cannot, the knowledge of how to work without giving away the last inner piece of yourself. The cane itself changes as you look longer. Some stalks are thick and healthy, their surfaces smooth and waxy under dust. Others show insect damage, breakage, or weakness near the root. The leaves rasp against each other when the wind reaches them, making a sound like dry paper rubbed slowly in restless hands. When a stalk is freshly cut, its inside gleams pale and wet for an instant before dulling in the sun. Ants gather around the sweetness. Bees drift in brief, golden loops. Even insects understand sugar's invitation. There were enslaved workers on some plantations who developed great expertise in judging the quality of cane and the proper moment for cutting, though planters rarely acknowledged that knowledge except when profit depended on it. Agricultural journals of the time liked to praise scientific management and improved machinery, yet the day-to-day success of a sugar crop often rested on the judgment and labour of people held in bondage. That truth sat in plain view, and still went officially unseen. The South had a remarkable talent for relying on black intelligence, while pretending only white authority counted. Quite a trick, morally rotten, but certainly elaborate. Clouds gather toward late afternoon, rising in soft grey towers beyond the river country. The light changes, losing some of its harsh glare. The field smells greener again, almost cool for a few minutes, though the heat stored in the earth keeps pushing upward through the soles of your feet. A distant rumble suggests thunder somewhere far off. Storms in Louisiana can build quickly, and weather always hovers over plantation life as both threat and excuse. Too much rain floods fields. Too little weakens growth. A storm can interrupt labour for an hour and make the next day twice as punishing. Your shoulders feel carved from ache. Your lower back pulses with every lift. When you straighten, the spine protests so sharply that the world narrows for a moment. Then it widens again because the row remains unfinished and the cane does not care about your opinion. Nearby, someone begins humming under the breath, too low to count as singing. Perhaps, but enough to create a rhythm. Work songs and spirituals could help pace motion, strengthen feeling, and preserve connection. Though on some plantations, overseers discouraged anything that sounded too collective or too alive. Even so, melody found cracks to live in. A fringe tidbit from Louisiana sugar country is that some planters and visitors became oddly fascinated by the chemistry of sugar making, discussing cane varieties, crystallization, and fuel efficiency with almost childlike excitement, while remaining astonishingly calm about the suffering required to feed those experiments. Human beings can become very proud of technical improvements achieved through other people's misery. They will publish essays, they will compare notes, they will act as if the machinery is the main drama. In the field, no one is fooled. By the last stretch of afternoon, the cut rows widen behind the crew, wagons groan away toward the mill, piled high with stalks, bits of leaf litter cling to your clothes. The skin on your forearms looks cross-hatched from scratches. Your mouth tastes of salt and plant fibre. Every breath seems to carry dust, sweetness, and fatigue all at once. The light softens, but the work does not. The plantation takes whatever the day still contains, and you stay on your feet, moving through the cane with the steady caution of someone who knows this field can wound by accident and by design, learning the exact harshness of sugar labour in Louisiana, not from a speech or a number, but from the sting in your hands, the pressure in your spine, the smell of crushed stalks thick in the hot air, and the relentless truth that the rows are long because the people who own them intend your strength to feel endless. By late day, the centre of the plantation is no longer the field. It is the mill. You feel its presence before you reach it. The sound arrives first, deep and irregular at the edge, then louder and more constant as you draw nearer. Wood knocks against wood, iron rattles. A belt slaps into motion. Rollers turn with a grinding appetite that seems less like a machine and more like some patient creature, trained to eat cane without ever becoming full. The whole yard around the works trembles with urgency. Wagons come in heavy and leave light. Men shout over noise that swallows ordinary speech. Steam rises in white bursts. Smoke drifts low from the furnaces and settles into your hair and clothes. The air here is thick enough to taste. It carries sweetness, yes, but not the gentle sweetness of the dessert plate or a spoon dipped into a bowl. This sweetness is raw, wet, and almost sour at the edges. Fresh cane juice spills and spatters. Crushed stalk fibre begins to ferment where it heaps too long. Ash from the furnace hangs in the throat. Hot metal, wet wood, mule sweat, and boiling syrup all blend into one smell that clings to the skin long after dark. It is the scent of production, which is a tidy word for a place built on strain, hazard, and forced precision. Sugar making in Louisiana is time-sensitive in a way that makes everyone near the mill move faster. Once cane is cut, the juice inside it begins to change. The longer it waits, the more value can be lost. Planters knew this very well, which is one reason sugar plantations often drove enslaved people, especially hard during grinding season. The crop had to be crushed, clarified, boiled, skimmed, reduced, and crystallized in sequence, with little room for delay. A good mill could turn out wealth. A broken mill could ruin a season. So all day and all night, during the busiest weeks, the works pull labour toward them like a storm. You step into the yard where loads of cut cane are stacked and sorted. The wagons arrive rattling, wheels caked with mud, stalks piled high and bound tight. Hands move quickly to unload them. Each bundle lands with a fibrous thud. Cane leaves scratch exposed arms. Loose juice slicks the boards beneath your feet. Someone shouts for more space. Someone else curses under the breath after nearly losing balance under a shifting load. No one has much energy to spare, so every motion has an edge. The millhouse looms beside you, part shed, part engine room, part danger. Inside, the rollers are the first thing you truly notice. They seize the eye because they are never still. Cane is fed between them in steady rhythm, and the stalks disappear with alarming speed, crushed hard enough to squeeze out their juice. On some plantations, the rollers were powered by steam by the 1850s, while others still relied partly on animal power or older arrangements. Louisiana sugar planters prided themselves on improvements in machinery, and agricultural writers of the era often celebrated new equipment with almost devotional enthusiasm. They wrote about output, efficiency, and cost. They said less about exhausted people working beside gears powerful enough to tear off an arm in a breath. That danger is real. Workers near the rollers must move quickly but not clumsily, which is a cruel instruction in any workplace, and especially in one where fatigue is already lodged deep in muscle. The cane must be guided in evenly. Jammed stalks have to be handled. Loose clothing must be watched. Hands must stay clear. A second of inattention can become catastrophe. Stories circulated about workers caught by the machinery, though plantation records often softened or obscured such injuries. Owners disliked paperwork that made the enterprise sound monstrous, even when the truth was standing in front of them, shrieking beside the rollers. The juice runs from the crushing process in pale green streams, frothy and grassy in smell. It flows through channels or pipes toward the boiling house, where another world of labour begins. You follow it there and meet heat in its most organised form. The boiling house is like walking into the open mouth of a furnace. Rows of kettles or pans stand over intense fires. Flames lick beneath iron. Steam clouds the rafters. The walls glisten with moisture and soot. Men work stripped down as much as decency and necessity allow. Shirts open or hanging loose. Skin slick with sweat that reflects the firelight in coppery flashes. The floor can be wet, sticky, or dangerous with spills. Long-handled tools scrape, stir, lift, and skim. Liquid moves from one vessel to the next as it thickens, darkens, and grows more concentrated. The process demands attention, judgment, and brutal endurance. You understand at once why people feared mill work. Field labour cuts and crushes the body over long hours, but the boiling house surrounds you with immediate threats. A stumble near a vat, a splash of hot syrup on bare skin, a slip on wet planks, a furnace door opened at the wrong moment. The temperature alone feels punishing enough to have intentions. Your face tightens from the heat, your eyelids sting. Every inhale seems to carry steam into the chest. Clothing turns heavy and then nearly dry again in rapid cycles. The skin on your forearms feels baked while your back remains damp. It is an exhausting contradiction. Sugar-making required skill. That fact matters. Experienced enslaved workers often handled crucial stages of processing because they knew how the juice should look, when foam needed skimming, how hot the kettles should run, and when the syrup had reached the right state for the next step. Clarification and concentration were not casual tasks. Too much heat, too little skimming, a poor transfer, or bad timing could reduce quality and profit. Some planters hired professional sugar makers or consultants, especially men from places with longer sugar traditions. But day-to-day expertise still rested heavily on enslaved labourers who learned through repetition, observation, and pressure. The plantation depended on their intelligence while denying their freedom. That contradiction burns as hot as the kettles. The sounds inside the boiling house are relentless. Syrup bubbles with a thick, wet popping. Furnace doors clang. Iron scrapes against iron. A supervisor calls out instructions half swallowed by steam. Wood cracks in the fire. Someone coughs, hard and repeatedly, then wipes the mouth and returns to the task. There is no clean silence anywhere, only layers of noise. Even the pauses feel noisy because your ears keep waiting for the next bang, hiss, or shout. At one side of the works lies the bagasse, the crushed cane fibre left after milling. In many sugar houses it is dried enough to be fed into the furnaces as fuel. This is one of those details that might impress an engineer and depress everyone else. The plant is worked twice, once for juice and once for heat, and the people are treated much the same. Every possible use is extracted. Very efficient. Very bleak. The colour of the juice changes as the process continues. Fresh cane liquid begins pale and cloudy, then deepens toward amber and brown as water boils away. Foam gathers and must be skimmed. Scum is removed. The syrup grows heavier, richer in smell, and almost beautiful in the firelight, which feels rude considering the circumstances. Louisiana's sugar houses in the mid-19th century often used a sequence of kettles or more modern vacuum pans on better equipped estates, depending on wealth and technology. Historians still disagree on how rapidly improved methods spread across plantations and how much genuine advantage they gave individual planters, because records can be boastful and local conditions varied widely. Planters loved to sound modern. Reality enjoyed being messier. Somewhere nearby, moulds, coolers, or hogsheads wait for later stages. Workers handle ladles, buckets, and skimmers with practiced speed. The syrup must move without wasting time. Delay is money lost. Spillage is rebuke. Breakage is danger. Every object in the room feels heavy with consequence. Even the shadows look tired. Night does not stop the work. That is one of the harsh truths of grinding season on a sugar plantation. When the crop comes in, the mill often continues for long stretches, and enslaved workers may labour in shifts or in overlapping patterns that reduce sleep to fragments. The plantation yard at night becomes its own harsh little world, lit by furnace glow, lantern light, and the ghostly drift of steam under darkness. Outside, the cane fields disappear into blackness. Inside, the works shine and roar like a forge built to process plants and people together. You feel the oddness of working while the sky is dark. The body expects rest, but the mill expects movement. Firelight throws faces into strange relief. Eyes look bright and hollow at once. Shadows jump on walls. Sparks burst upward when fuel is fed into the furnace. Bats flicker overhead beyond the smoke. Somewhere a mule stamps and snorts in the yard. Someone carries another load of cane up the ramp. Someone else drags a tool through syrup residue with a scraping sound that sets your teeth on edge. Fatigue changes everything. Hands grow less certain. Footing feels trickier. Tempers shorten. Small mistakes multiply. A worker who has already spent hours in the field now stands beside boiling kettles or feeding cane into rollers, expected to be accurate despite aching limbs and blurred sight. Plantation discipline does not treat tiredness as a limit. It treats tiredness as disobedience waiting for punishment. That makes mill season especially feared. The demand does not merely continue after sunset, it intensifies. There were enslaved men on Louisiana sugar plantations whose roles in the mill made them indispensable in practical terms, even though the law treated them as property. Some managed parts of the boiling process, some maintained engines, some handled repairs, some drove teams or supervised flows of material under white direction. This did not protect them from violence or sale. It simply made their labour more valuable to others. There is a bitter little lesson there. Skill can increase your usefulness inside slavery without improving your humanity in the eyes of the people profiting from it. A curious tidbit from the era is how visitors sometimes described sugar houses almost as theatres of industry, marvelling at the glow of fires and the orderly march from cane to crystal. They admired the spectacle, they praised the science, they complimented the owner's enterprise. It is remarkable what a person can call impressive when standing a comfortable distance from suffering. The same visitor who noted the beauty of golden syrup might say almost nothing about the man skimming foam with blistered hands beside it. The sweetness in the air thickens as the boiling continues. It settles on your tongue until even breathing tastes sticky. Ash dots the skin. Soot clings at the nostrils. Your hair smells smoked. The heat seeps into the bones so completely that stepping briefly outside feels shocking, as if the night itself has become cold water laid across the face. In the yard, the dark seems wide and almost soft for a moment. Crickets sound from the weeds. Frogs call from ditches, Above the smoke, the stars are faint but present. Then someone calls your name, or not exactly your name, more the name the plantation uses for you, and you turn back toward the lighted doorway. Inside again, the kettles continue their thick muttering. Men lean into work with the slow steadiness of people protecting themselves from sudden movements. One tends the skimmer, one feeds fuel, one watches the consistency of the syrup, another shoulders sacks or shifts containers. Language is clipped. Gestures do half the talking. The room teaches economy because the heat punishes anything extra. Sweat drips from chins, arms glisten, eyes redden from smoke. A back cracks audibly when someone straightens. Then the body bends again. Even the floor records the labour. Syrup residue hardens in streaks. Mud from the yard mixes with ash. Footprints overlap and disappear. The boards carry stains from seasons of boiling, and every stain represents hours stolen from human lives. If the plantation had a true ledger, not the one in the owner's office but an honest one, it would count these things differently. Not barrels and pounds. Burns and broken sleep, coughs, cuts, days shortened by heat, nights measured in ladles of syrup and loads of fuel. Yet people still make room for one another. One worker passes a cloth to another without fanfare. Someone nudges a water dipper closer with a soot-darkened boot. A warning is given before a kettle is moved. A hand catches a slipping handle before it falls against bare skin. These acts are quick and nearly hidden, but they create a small human order within the plantation's violent order. Under conditions designed to make people instruments, they keep behaving like people. Toward the deeper hours of night, the steam hanging near the rafters turns silver in lantern light. The fires settle into a steadier roar. Batches advance. Syrup thickens. Sugar begins to emerge from liquid labour into tangible form. The whole point of the plantation, the glittering prize meant for market, for profit, for tables far away where strangers will sweeten tea without imagining the room where this work was done. You can almost see the chain connecting everything. Riverboat, warehouse, merchant, breakfast table. The sugar moves outward. The suffering stays here. That knowledge sits heavily. It sits in the throat with the smoke, in the eyes with the sting of steam, in the shoulders bent over tools, in the feet planted on sticky boards, while the machinery grinds and the kettles boil and the night keeps thinning toward dawn. The mill does not sleep because the plantation values sugar more than rest, more than flesh, more than safety, and as you stand in its heat and clamour, with raw sweetness coating the air and the furnaces breathing against your skin, you understand why this place was feared not simply as a work site, but as the hard, blazing heart of Louisiana's sugar world in 1855. When the labouring hours loosen their grip, you make your way to the cabins with a body that no longer feels entirely borrowed from yourself. The quarters sit low against the Louisiana ground. Practical in the harshest sense of the word. They are built to house labour, not to honour life. In fading light or under a dim moon, the cabins can look almost quiet, even gentle from a distance. Small shapes gathered near trees or paths, smoke lifting thinly from a few chimneys. Then you come closer, and the truth returns in full. The walls are rough, the openings are narrow, the air inside can be close, damp, and stale from too many people sharing too little space. Home exists here, but it has to be made by the people inside, because the structure itself offers very little kindness. You feel the floor first. It may be dirt packed hard by many feet, or rough boards that shift and creak under your weight. Gaps in the walls let in drafts when the weather turns cold, and Louisiana can surprise people with winter chills sharp enough to cut through thin clothing. In warmer months the heat settles indoors and stays. Mosquitoes slip through cracks. Smoke clings under the roof if the fire does not draw well. The smell is a layered thing. Ash, sweat dried into cloth, damp wood, cornmeal, old grease, a baby's blanket, healing herbs hung up to dry. human breath in a crowded room. Nothing here is polished, but nearly everything matters. Furnishings are sparse, a bedstead if someone has managed one. More often pallets, straw ticks, blankets, quilts pieced from scraps, or whatever can be arranged to soften the floor, a few stools, a table if there is luck, carpentry skill, or extra wood, iron pots blackened from repeated use, gourd dippers, wooden bowls, a chest or crate where clothing, tools, or precious personal things can be stored. Some enslaved people crafted stools, shelves, pegs, or bed frames with great care when time and materials allowed. Even the simplest object shaped by your own hands carries a kind of dignity. It says you are still arranging a life, not merely occupying a space assigned by force. Light comes from the hearth, a candle if one can be spared, or a lamp in households that have managed a little oil. Fire changes the cabin completely. Faces emerge from shadow, hands move in orange light, a pot begins to steam. Someone warms stiff fingers over the coals. The day's public labour gives way to private labour, which is less visible to the plantation and therefore easy for outsiders to underestimate. But evenings in the quarters are rarely idle. Clothes must be mended. Food must be prepared. Children must be washed, soothed, fed, corrected, and comforted. Tools need attention. The sick need care. The old need help settling down. Bodies need looking after with whatever means can be found. Hunger sits near the hearth like an extra person. Rations issued by the plantation are often insufficient in both quantity and variety. Cornmeal remains a staple. Salt pork appears often enough to be familiar, and not often enough to be satisfying. Molasses may sweeten food, though sweetness cannot replace nourishment. Some plantations distributed weekly portions, leaving families or cabin groups to stretch and combine what they had. Others supplemented imperfectly or irregularly. The result is a constant calculation. What can be cooked now? What must be saved? What can be traded? What can be grown? What can be caught in water or woods, if a rare chance presents itself? So supper becomes an act of skill. Cornmeal can be made into mush, hoe cakes, ash cakes, or pone, depending on equipment and circumstance. Greens from a patch might go into the pot if someone has managed to tend one. A little bacon grease changes everything. Peas, beans, or sweet potatoes, when available, can make the meal feel almost generous. Fish from a bayou or river branch, a rabbit snared quietly, or herbs gathered with knowledge and care can shift the balance between mere survival and something closer to satisfaction. Enslaved people across the South, including Louisiana, often relied heavily on gardens and supplemental foodways to reduce hunger. Planters sometimes encouraged gardens because they lowered provisioning costs, then congratulated themselves on benevolence. A neat trick. Starve people slightly, let them save themselves, then call it kindness. The food smells stronger than it looks. That's part of its comfort. The scent of corn browning on a hearthstone, green softening in a pot, onion, if one can be had, turning sweet in heat, smoke touching everything. The cabin grows warmer as cooking continues, and in that warmth shoulders lower a little. A child edges closer to the fire. Someone licks cracked lips at the first real smell of supper. Wooden spoons scrape bowls. The first mouthful enters a body that has been giving itself away since dawn, and for a moment the world narrows to chewing, swallowing, and feeling the stomach answer back with gratitude. Not everyone eats enough. That truth does not soften because it is common. Malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, and chronic hunger shaped plantation life more than planters like to admit. People could be visibly strong and still underfed. They could endure astonishing labour while carrying a constant nutritional debt in the body. Illness then hit harder. Wounds healed slower. Pregnancy became more dangerous. Children grew under strain. The system took calories and returned discipline. Still, the quarters are not defined by deprivation alone. They are also places of invention. A woman folds cloth into a head wrap with practised fingers. An older man smooths a tool handle with a scrap of glass until it fits the hand better. Someone braids a child's hair by the fire. Someone else turns leftover bones into broth. A torn shirt is patched so neatly that the seam becomes almost decorative. A gourd becomes a ladle. A broken chair leg becomes kindling. A worn blanket becomes two smaller blankets. Resourcefulness is not a romantic trait here. It is daily engineering under pressure. You notice sound differently in the cabins than in the fields or mill. Here the noises are close and human-sized. Spoons tapping bowls, murmured talk, a baby fussing, quiet laughter, the rasp of needle through cloth, someone rubbing sore feet with grease or tallow, someone clearing a throat after too much smoke and dust. Outside, frogs start up in the wet ground. Insect hum thickens in the dark. From a little distance, voices from neighbouring cabins drift and fade, each household wrapped in its own small circle of work and fatigue. Touch matters deeply in these hours. Hands rinsed in cool water from a bucket, a cloth pressed to a swollen ankle, a child asleep against an adult shoulder, hair carefully parted and combed with a carved pick, warm pottery between the palms, the roughness of homespun cloth, the sting of a scratch washed out, the surprising softness of quilt pieces made from old garments worn thin by use. Where the plantation works by force, the cabin often works by touch that restores, cleans, steadies, and reassures. Health is part of evening labour too. On many plantations, black people cared for sickness and injury largely through their own knowledge, drawing on African, African-American, Native, Creole, and local remedies where possible. Herbs, poultices, teas, steam, roots, and practical experience mattered enormously. A fevered child might be sponged down and watched all night. A cut arm might be washed and wrapped with careful hands. A chest cough might be treated with a bitter brew, whose smell fills the room before anyone drinks it. Historians still debate how much of this healing knowledge can be traced cleanly to specific traditions, because practices mixed and changed across generations and regions. What is certain is that people built medical care for one another in the gaps left by neglect. Some cabins hold more than one family, some hold extended kin, some gather people linked by marriage, necessity, or affection rather than blood. Slavery constantly threatened family stability through sale, hiring out, punishment, and unequal power over intimate life. Yet families persisted in many forms. A grandmother disciplines a child not born from her body, but loved as her own. A couple shares food, though one received less ration this week. Neighbours exchange salt, thread, or advice. Kinship expands because the system tries so hard to break it. There are personal possessions too, though often few and deeply valued. A kerchief saved for church or rare occasions. A tin cup, a wooden comb. A Bible if someone can read or if the object carries comfort regardless. Beads, buttons, a pipe, a small knife, a coin hidden in cloth. A letter from a loved one if fortune has somehow allowed such a thing to exist. Archaeologists and historians studying enslaved quarters have found evidence of charms, ceramics, buttons, bones, pipes, and personal items that suggest worlds of belief and attachment far richer than plantation inventories ever admitted. A planter's list might count blankets. It could not count what one scrap of cloth meant because a mother once wore it. Children alter the atmosphere even in hardship. They ask questions. They sulk. They laugh too loudly. They fall asleep mid-sentence. They play with astonishing seriousness using sticks, stones, rags, corn husks, or whatever the world gives them. Childhood under slavery is constrained and burdened, but it is not erased. A little girl rocks a makeshift doll and scolds it with perfect adult authority. A boy draws lines in the dirt and invents a game from pebbles. Another child sits silent, listening to adults with solemn eyes far older than they should be. All of them absorb the rules of the plantation. All of them also absorb songs, gestures, recipes, warnings, and forms of love that refuse the plantation's logic. One quirky little detail of cabin life in the South is how much dignity could be expressed through sweeping. Visitors sometimes noticed yards around cabins kept neatly swept with handmade brooms, the bare earth smooth and tidy. This was not trivial fussing. A swept yard reduced pests, signalled care, and created visible order in a world bent on disordering your life. It was also beautiful in its own quiet way. A clean threshold can say, "This place is poor, crowded, vulnerable, and still ours for the evening." Clothing receives its own share of attention. Plantation-issue garments were often coarse, ill-fitting, and limited, especially for people doing punishing labour. Women patch knees, reinforce seams, turn collars, and salvage fabric from garments too worn to serve in full. Men dry shirts by the fire and examine shoes if they have them, judging whether one more repair can be wrung from leather already near its last breath. Needlework in tired hands is slow but exact. The cabin glows softly while the thread pulls through. Small tasks, done repeatedly, hold life together more effectively than grand speeches ever could. Sometimes people talk, not always. Some evenings fatigue empties language out of everyone and only the necessary words remain. But on other nights the room fills with stories, teasing, prayer, or soft conversation about weather, food, children, the owner's moods, aches in the joints, rumours from a nearby plantation, or the quality of someone's greens. Gentle sarcasm survives indoors nicely. Someone observes that the planter's dog eats better than half the parish, and has less work besides. A few people smile into their bowls. Nobody argues. Religious life also enters these spaces in intimate form. A whispered prayer over a sick person. A hymn hummed low enough not to attract the wrong attention. A verse remembered imperfectly but held dearly. Christian faith took strong root among many enslaved communities, often blending with older spiritual understandings and local practice. Not everyone believed the same way. Not everyone trusted the religion preached by white masters. But many found strength in a God who might hear them even when earthly power refused. The hours grow deeper. Coals settle lower, bowls are scraped clean. A child is lifted half asleep onto a pallet. Someone steps outside and returns with night air clinging to their clothes, bringing in the smell of wet grass and distant river mud. The cabin darkens except for the glow of embers and an occasional shift of flame. Bodies ease downward onto bedding or floor coverings. A groan escapes someone without permission. Another person laughs softly at nothing in particular, just from tiredness crossing into absurdity. Rest itself takes work in a crowded room. Blankets are arranged. Infants are settled where they will not be rolled onto. Shoes are tucked near reach. A pot is covered. The fire is banked if fuel is scarce. Someone checks the latch, though locks mean little against true power. Mosquitoes whine at the edge of hearing. Fleas or lice may make themselves known because the plantation rarely grants the conditions for real comfort. Still, lying down matters. Even a poor pallet feels merciful to legs that have carried the day. In these cabins, survival becomes visible in its most ordinary and most profound form. Not in dramatic speeches, not in public declarations, in bowls filled from scant stores, in cloth patched by firelight, in herbs crushed for the sick, in children hushed to sleep, in swept earth, shared food, guarded tenderness, and hands that keep making shelter where almost none has been provided. The plantation means these quarters to be simple holding spaces for labouring bodies, yet each night they become something harder to control, a place where black Americans in Louisiana in 1855 gather the scattered pieces of themselves and, with ash on the hearth and hunger never far away, build enough comfort to endure another day. On this plantation, black women are asked to carry a world that already weighs too much. You see it in the way the day is arranged around them, though arranged is too graceful a word for such relentless demand. A woman may rise in darkness, tend a child, stir embers, swallow a few bites of food, and step into the field before the sky is fully declared morning. She may cut cane, weed rows, haul bundles, or labour in tasks the plantation labels lighter, which usually means equally tiring but easier to describe in a ledger. She may then return to cook, mend, wash, soothe, and prepare for the next day. Somewhere inside this crush of duties, she's also expected to remain calm, obedient, capable, fertile, and endlessly available to the needs of others. It is an impossible standard. The plantation still insists on it. Louisiana sugar estates in 1855 depended heavily on the labour of black women. On some plantations, women worked in the fields beside men, especially in planting, hoeing, weeding, and harvesting support tasks, though the exact division varied by season, owner, and local custom. Sugar required such immense labour that planters often worked women hard in outdoor gangs, despite occasional claims of paternal care. Those claims tended to dissolve the moment profit felt threatened. A woman's body could be praised as delicate in one sentence and driven like machinery in the next. Such contradictions were not accidents. They were part of slavery's method. You begin to notice how often women move while carrying something: a child on the hip, a bucket in each hand, firewood gathered in an apron, wet clothes for washing, a pot balanced carefully, cane leaves clinging to the skirt, a burden of expectation that has no visible shape, but shows in the shoulders all the same, even standing still. Many women seem to hold several tasks in mind at once. Who needs food? Who is ill? Which garment can still be patched? Whether the baby's cough sounds worse tonight? Whether a daughter has reached an age where new dangers begin crowding close? The field does not spare them. When women labour in cane, the heat reaches them just the same, the cuts from leaves sting just the same, and the mud drags at their feet with no special courtesy. Tools do not lighten because the hand gripping them is smaller. Supervisors do not become patient because someone is exhausted from nursing an infant at midnight. You may see a woman bend, lift, and straighten with movements so economical they almost look graceful, though the grace comes not from ease, but from long necessity. She wastes nothing, not motion, not breath, not attention. Some women are pregnant while doing this labour. That fact sits like a stone in the chest. Plantation records and testimony make clear that pregnant enslaved women were often expected to continue working, sometimes with limited adjustments, sometimes with very few. The extent of any relief depended on the owner's policy, the stage of pregnancy, the season's demands, and simple cruelty. One planter might claim generosity for reducing a task slightly. Another might drive women nearly unchanged until late pregnancy. Even where custom allowed some rest near childbirth, it was rarely enough to meet the body's real needs. Historians still argue over how far economic calculation versus local labour shortages shape these practices, but no interpretation softens the daily risk. You can almost feel the tension in each movement, a hand pressed briefly to the lower back, a slower rise from crouching, a pause so short it could be mistaken for thought rather than pain. Then the work continues because there is little choice. The plantation takes even the body's most private transformations and places them under command. Childbearing, which should belong to family, to tenderness, to the rhythms of life itself, becomes entangled with ownership, labour quotas, and future property value. There are few uglier achievements in human society than turning motherhood into bookkeeping. And yet motherhood remains real. Not the planter's version, not the inventory line, the lived one. A woman quiets a frightened child with a hand on the head and a voice lowered into warmth. She knows which tone means bedtime, which tone means warning, which tone means you are safe enough for this moment. She can stir cornmeal with one hand and untangle a girl's hair with the other. She can tell from a child's face whether the trouble is hunger, fever, or plain stubbornness. She can laugh, once, at some small foolishness, then return to seriousness because the world she must prepare them for does not allow many trial runs. Black women on plantations often served as the main transmitters of practical life. Food knowledge, gardening skill, herbal remedies, sewing, childcare, family stories, social caution, and spiritual habits frequently pass through their hands and voices. A girl might learn how to patch a shirt, how to sweep a yard smooth, how to keep food from spoiling too quickly, how to interpret danger in a white person's expression, how to wrap cloth around the head in heat, how to speak one way in public and another in private. A boy might learn similar lessons about caution, bodily care, respect, and survival. These teachings were not formal, yet they formed an education more urgent than any school. Inside the quarters, women's labour multiplies rather than ends. Water must be fetched and heated, pots must be scrubbed, clothes must be washed by hand in tiring repetition, rubbed, beaten, wrung, and hung. Soap, when available, may be coarse and harsh on skin already cracked from work. Laundry alone can feel like a second field, all pulling, lifting, steaming, and bending. Then there is sewing. Plantation clothing issued to enslaved people was typically plain, rough, and inadequate. Women repair hems, reinforce knees, patch elbows, and turn worn cloth into smaller useful things. A shirt becomes lining. A skirt becomes strips for binding. Nothing is discarded lightly because replacement is never guaranteed. Touching these garments tells a story. The cloth is stiff in some places, thin in others, shiny at stress points, rough against the fingers where repeated washing has not softened but merely weakened it. Needle and thread move through fabric under dim light, while eyes ache from smoke or fatigue. The room smells of iron pots, damp cloth, old wood, and bodies settling in for the evening. A child leans drowsily against a woman's leg while she sews. Another asks for food that has already been portioned as far as it can go. Her answer has to be both gentle and final. That balancing act may be the hidden skill at the centre of her life. There is also labour beyond her own household. On many plantations, some black women were assigned domestic service in the planter's house, working as cooks, nurses, cleaners, seamstresses, or personal attendants. These roles are sometimes imagined as less brutal than field labour because they occurred indoors. But that idea fades quickly under examination. Domestic work involved constant surveillance, intimate proximity to white families, extreme expectations of obedience, and vulnerability to verbal, physical, and sexual abuse. The hours could be long and unpredictable. A house servant might be called at any time, blamed for tiny imperfections, and denied rest by the very closeness of the place she worked. The house has its own atmosphere: polished wood, candle wax, starch, meat roasting, coffee, soap, perfume drifting from a mistress's room, wet boots near a back door, silver laid out for meals the worker will not share, floors cool beneath tired feet, bell pulls, instructions, corrections, a sharp voice from another room, a tray balanced carefully, a nursery child clinging affectionately in 1 hour and calling the white mother by title in the next. Enslaved women in such roles were often expected to perform emotional steadiness as part of the job. No irritation, no visible exhaustion, no honest reply. It is labour of the face as much as the hand. And then there is the danger too many records tried to hide. Black women under slavery were vulnerable not only to labour exploitation but to sexual coercion and assault by owners, overseers, and other white men who held power over every condition of daily life. The law offered little meaningful protection. Silence could be forced. Complaint could bring punishment. Families lived with constant knowledge of this risk. It shaped how mothers watched daughters, how women judged spaces, times, and tempers, how they read footsteps outside a door. This is one of the harshest truths in plantation life, and it cannot be softened without becoming false. Yet even under that threat, women found ways to guard one another when possible. A warning passed in a glance. An older woman sleeping near a younger one. An excuse created to avoid being left alone in a particular place. Children kept close. shared knowledge about who to avoid and when. None of this removed danger, but it built nets of care in a world designed to tear them apart. The brilliance of these small protections lies partly in how ordinary they could appear from the outside. The plantation often saw compliance where women were actually practicing vigilance. A quirky detail preserved in some accounts is the importance of head wraps, not only for practicality in heat and labour, but for style, self-presentation, and social meaning. A woman might tie cloth in a way that protected her hair, absorbed sweat, and still declared taste. Folds mattered. Colour mattered when colour could be had. Even under coercive dress systems, people found small openings for elegance. That may seem minor until you understand that beauty under oppression is not a luxury alone. It can be a refusal. Women also carried the work of memory. They remembered births, deaths, kin ties, recipes, remedies, stories, and names the plantation tried to flatten. They remembered who belonged to whom. They remembered who had been sold, who had come from another parish, which child resembled a grandmother, which song comforted a feverish boy, which herb helped with stomach pain, which month the owner's temper worsened, which path stayed driest after rain. History at the cabin level often lived in women's mouths and hands. No archive kept with greater care. Their emotional labour rarely receives its full measure either. A woman may absorb her own grief while calming someone else's. She may hide terror so children can sleep. She may speak to a man whose humiliation in the field has followed him home like smoke, and she must choose words that neither wound his pride nor deny reality. She may mourn a child buried too young, then rise the next morning because other children still need feeding. There is no hour set aside for such burdens. They travel alongside every other task. The body keeps score all the while. Swollen feet from standing, hands roughened by lye, soil, and cloth, breasts aching from milk, a back that never fully stops hurting, eyes strained by dim light, skin marked by heat, scratches and repeated labour. Yet the body is also a source of astonishing capability. It kneads, carries, rocks, cuts, scrubs, lifts, nurses, stitches, and embraces. Under slavery, white society liked to describe black women's bodies in ways that justified exploitation, calling them strong when strength was profitable and vulnerable, when blame needed somewhere to land. In truth, their bodies were simply human bodies asked to perform beyond fairness. Sometimes very late, there is singing, not always a full song, sometimes only a phrase, low and rounded, almost meant for the singer alone. A melody used to settle a baby, a hum while stirring a pot. A line of a spiritual held under the breath like a coal that stays warm in the dark. Sound can soothe the room when words are spent. It can also carry meaning that slips past surveillance more easily than speech. One scholar once noted that plantation women often seemed to live in overlapping circles of production and reproduction, meaning they were forced to make wealth for others, while also sustaining the next generation of labourers and loved ones. The phrase is accurate enough, but here in the cabin it becomes flesh. It looks like a woman tying a child's shoe from scraps after spending the day bent in a field. It sounds like her voice giving instruction while she coughs from smoke. It smells like soap, cornmeal, tired skin, and herbs crushed in a cup. It feels like a hand against a fevered forehead after every ounce of strength should have been gone already. And still she goes on, not because the burden is reasonable, not because the plantation deserves such endurance, but because life keeps asking things of her that matter more than the plantation's logic. Children matter, kin matter, self-respect matters, the preservation of skill, tenderness, humour, caution, and hope matters. In the harsh sugar world of Louisiana in 1855, black women are made to carry labour, family, danger, memory, and care all at once. And as you watch the steady force of that carrying in the field, at the hearth, at the washpot, in the doorway, in the long dim hours when others finally sleep, you understand that much of the community's survival rests in the hands of women who are asked for everything and somehow still manage to protect what they can. Sunday arrives with a different texture, though not with anything as generous as freedom. The plantation does not suddenly become kind. The cane still stands in rows. The mill still exists with its blackened walls and hungry machinery. The overseer still carries authority in his posture like a weapon strapped on invisibly. Yet the day can loosen certain routines just enough for another kind of life to become visible. Work may be reduced, shifted, or rearranged. On some sugar plantations, especially in the grinding season, labour could still intrude heavily even on Sunday. But where hours open at all, black families and neighbours try to gather the fragments and make something resembling rest. That takes skill too. The morning air feels different when you step outside and do not at once move into the usual line of labour. The smell of damp earth rises under a pale sky. Smoke begins to lift from cabin chimneys in softer curls. Voices carry farther because they are not immediately buried under machinery and shouted command. Someone sweeps the packed yard with a handmade broom, drawing neat arcs in the dust. The gesture is simple. The effect is not. A clean yard calms the eye. It declares order in a place built on disorder. Some people wash early. Water is fetched, heated if fuel allows, and used carefully because nothing can be wasted without consequence. Faces are scrubbed. Hands are cleaned more thoroughly than on work mornings. Children are rubbed behind the ears with determined fingers. Hair is combed, parted, braided, wrapped, or smoothed with grease. A shirt saved for better moments is shaken out and put on. A kerchief is tied with precision. A dress too worn for elegance still becomes respectable under careful hands. You see how much meaning lives in preparation. To be clean on Sunday, even briefly, is not vanity. It is restoration. The body notices at once. Skin feels cooler after washing. Cloth sits differently when it's not stiff with the whole week's labour. The scalp eases under a fresh wrap. A child straightens with shy pride when praised for looking fine. The air itself seems lighter, where soap, damp cotton, wood smoke, and morning sweetness mix. Even the sounds feel softened. A pot lid, a low laugh, the scratch of a broom, a bird calling from a fence rail. For a little while, the plantation atmosphere is interrupted by domestic intention. Food can change on this day as well, not always in quantity, because scarcity remains honest and persistent, but sometimes in care, as missile is prepared more slowly, greens are seasoned with unusual patience. Cornbread is watched so it browns just right. A bit of fish, if someone has managed one, may be saved for the day. Molasses might be spread more generously across a cake if there is enough. The smell coming from the cabins can be deeply comforting, all warmth and smoke and grain and leaf. Hunger remains, but it is met with ceremony rather than haste. Then people begin to gather. Sometimes the gathering's open, sometimes cautious. Sometimes it happens under the eye of whites who approve only certain forms of worship or social order. Sometimes it happens a little apart, in a yard, under trees, near the quarters, or in a brush-covered space where sound can rise without carrying too far. Louisiana plantation life varied widely in these matters. Some owners promoted supervised Christian services, hoping religion would encourage obedience. Others feared unsupervised gatherings as possible sites of planning, resistance, or emotional intensity beyond their control. Black people themselves shaped worship in ways no planter fully commanded. You may hear a prayer first, low, steady, personal. Then another voice joins, then a murmur of assent. A hymn begins not from printed page, but from memory and breath. It may be lined out slowly, one phrase offered and then answered. It may sway. It may deepen until the sound holds sorrow and endurance together in one long note. Spiritual life in the quarters does not always depend on formal preaching. A mother's prayer over a child, an old man speaking scripture from memory, a woman testifying softly about deliverance. These can matter just as much as a sermon. Many enslaved black people in the South embraced Christianity, but often in ways that transformed it. stories of exodus, suffering, justice, deliverance, and the nearness of God to the oppressed carried particular force. Biblical language could become both comfort and coded hope. At the same time, older African and African American spiritual patterns did not simply vanish. Rhythm, repetition, bodily response, sacred dreams, healing customs, and communal forms of meaning often survived in changed but recognizable ways. Historians still debate how exactly these threads blended in specific places, because plantation records rarely understood what they were observing. But anyone listening closely can tell the faith in the quarters is not a copy of the planters' religion. It breathes differently. There is music too, sometimes only a hum, sometimes clapping if the setting allows. Sometimes a tune rises from somewhere near the chest rather than the mouth, a sound shaped by fatigue, longing, and steady conviction. The voice of one singer leans into the next. Children imitate the rhythm. A foot taps on packed earth. Someone closes the eyes. Someone else stares into the distance while singing as though watching another landscape entirely. Music here is not decoration. It is memory carried in vibration. And then there is talk. Sunday talk has a looser weave than weekday speech. People exchange bits of news from nearby plantations, river landings, markets, and roads. A relative hired out somewhere else may have sent a word through another traveller. Someone mentions a birth, someone else a death. A woman asks quietly after an elderly aunt whose cough worsened last week. Men compare garden growth, fishing luck, and the quality of tools. Children drift around the edges, listening without seeming to listen. The social world of the quarters becomes clearer when time opens enough for people to speak whole thoughts. Gardens deserve their own attention. On many plantations, enslaved people cultivated small patches near the quarters where they grew corn, greens, beans, peas, sweet potatoes, onions, squash, or other useful crops when land and time allowed. These gardens were practical sources of food, but they were also places of pride, experimentation, and relative control. A man may kneel on Sunday to loosen soil around collards. A woman may pinch dead leaves from a bean vine and inspect the stems for pests. A child is sent to fetch water in a bucket. The smell here is wonderfully specific. Wet dirt, crushed leaf, warm sun, and the clean peppery scent of growing things. Working your own plot feels different from forced labour. The motions can be similar. Bend, weed, lift, carry. Yet intention changes the whole experience. You decide where to place the seed, when to harvest the bean, how to save the strongest plants, how to share the result, even under severe limits. That sliver of control matters deeply. One quirky detail often noted in plantation regions is how skilled some enslaved gardeners became at coaxing abundance from poor or cramped soil with scraps, ash, manure, and careful timing. Human beings will create little kingdoms of competence anywhere they can. Trade sometimes takes shape on these days too. A few eggs, a bunch of greens, a little tobacco, a stitched item, fish, herbs, a carved handle. Small exchanges among enslaved people, and sometimes with poor whites or in local informal markets, could supplement rations and create tiny zones of autonomy. Planters tolerated or regulated such activity unevenly. Some liked the reduction in provisioning costs, others feared mobility and independent contact. Either way, exchange taught value in a language beyond the master's ledger. A woman knows exactly how much labour sits inside a basket of sweet potatoes. A man knows what an extra fish is worth to a family with children. Money may appear in small quantities, or barter may do the work. Courtship lives in these openings as well. A man walks more slowly past a cabin where he hopes to be noticed. A woman smooths her dress without pretending it is accidental. Two people speak near a fence, careful with tone and distance, because privacy on a plantation is thin as old cloth. Marriage among enslaved people could be emotionally real and socially recognized within the community. even when the law denied it dignity. Some couples lived on the same plantation, others did not, forced into fragile patterns of visiting when owners allowed. Sunday could become the only day when affection had room to breathe in public. Children make the most of these hours. They invent games from almost nothing, because children are magicians of material. Corn cobs become toys, sticks become horses, swords, canes, fishing poles, whatever the game requires. Pebbles mark boundaries, bare feet kick up dust. Laughter rings out in quick bursts that feel almost startling against the usual discipline of the place. A group chases one another around cabins until an elder tells them not to raise such a storm. They lower the volume by perhaps 10%, which in child mathematics counts as obedience. Older people sit and observe. Their presence steadies the whole scene. An elderly woman shells peas into her lap while watching 3 households at once. An older man trims a piece of wood with a knife, pausing now and then to offer comment that is half advice and half teasing. The smell of tobacco drifts from a pipe. A story begins, maybe about a storm years ago, a trickster tale, a memory from Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, the Caribbean, or someplace held now only in fragments. Oral history survives in such moments, not as museum speech, but as family weather. A fringe tidbit from plantation life is that fiddles, banjos, drums of altered form, or homemade instruments could appear in some enslaved communities despite planters' uneven attitudes toward music and gathering. A gourd, stretched skin, wire, wood, hands, and ingenuity could produce a whole social evening. Music for dancing might be tolerated, restricted, or condemned depending on local white control and paranoia. Where it occurred, it created a different physical energy from worship, lighter on the feet, sharper in humour, alive with flirtation and release. Even a few minutes of dancing could return a sense of ownership to the body. The atmosphere of Sunday is therefore mixed. Relief and caution, joy and watchfulness, reverence and hunger. You never forget the plantation while resting on it. Someone is always measuring, always noticing movement, always able to interrupt. A white rider on the road changes the tone of a gathering immediately. Voices soften, bodies shift, children are called closer. The freedom available here is partial, provisional, and often borrowed from the plantation's temporary inattention, rather than granted in any moral sense. Still, partial does not mean meaningless. In quieter hours, people may simply sit. That too is valuable. To sit in a doorway with evening air touching the face, to listen to insects begin their nightly hum, to feel your muscles complain less fiercely because they have not been driven without pause, to hold a sleeping child, to scrape mud from a shoe, to stare at the sky changing colour above the cane. The senses reopen under rest. You smell river damp and wood smoke separately rather than as one blur. You hear distant birds, a low conversation, someone humming in the next yard. Touch becomes gentler. The bench under you is rough, but it supports rather than demands. There are also moments of inward life, a person reading. If literacy has been gained through stealth, luck, teaching, or stubborn brilliance. Another memorizing a verse. Another thinking silently about kin far away. Prayer may happen again here, smaller and more private than before. Hope can enter by odd doors on Sunday. Not loud hope, not easy hope. Something quieter, the kind that settles beside fatigue without arguing with it. As dusk comes down over the quarters, fires are lit again, supper smells rise, children grow slower, conversations thin and warm, worship, gardening, gossip, trade, play, music, courtship, and simple stillness all begin to fold back into household life. Nothing about the day has removed the plantation's cruelty. Yet for these hours, black Americans living under slavery in Louisiana have done something remarkable and ordinary at once. They have taken scraps of time, scraps of privacy, scraps of control, and turned them into community, cleanliness, song, food, devotion, beauty, and breath. In a world determined to make them only labouring bodies, Sunday allows them to appear more fully to one another as neighbours, parents, sweethearts, elders, believers, gardeners, musicians, and souls. Power on a sugar plantation rarely needs to shout all the time. It prefers to linger. You feel it in the pause before an order, in the way conversation lowers when certain footsteps pass, in the small tightening that moves through a yard when a rider appears at the edge of sight. On this Louisiana estate in 1855, white authority is built into buildings, schedules, punishments, papers, and habits. It sits in the big house, certainly, but it also rides the lanes, enters the cabins, inspects the tools, counts the hands, judges the pace, and decides whether your family remains together or is torn apart for cash. The shadow it casts is long because it does not fall from one man alone. It falls from an entire system that has arranged law, custom, and daily routine to make domination feel ordinary. The overseer is the most visible edge of that system. He may not own the plantation, but he carries the owner's will in practical form, which often makes him feared more immediately than the planter himself. You know the shape of his authority by how it enters a space. Horse first, leather creaking, hooves sounding harder on the lane than bare feet ever could. Then the glance that moves over bodies like a measuring rod. He watches for slowness, for talking, for a bent posture that looks too restful, for any sign that labour is not being squeezed tightly enough from the people before him. He does not need to strike every day. The possibility does part of the work. Fear on a plantation is organised with great efficiency. Sometimes it arrives as open violence, sometimes as threat, sometimes as a story repeated from another field, another cabin, another plantation nearby. Someone was whipped for answering back, someone else for running. A woman was punished for refusing an order, a driver was blamed for another person's pace, a child saw too much and learned too early. News of punishment travels quickly because power wants it to travel. It saves effort when terror can walk on its own legs. The whip is not only pain, it is theatre. White men in authority often use punishment publicly to instruct the rest. The body of one person becomes a warning to many. This is part of the cruelty. Suffering is made social, not private. Everyone is expected to witness, absorb, and adjust. The sounds alone can live in memory for years. The crack in the air, the forced breathing, the silence afterward, which can feel louder than the blow itself. Plantation journals and account books sometimes referred to punishment in flat, almost clerical language, as if a beating were no more morally charged than repairing a fence. Human wickedness can be astonishingly tidy when it keeps records, yet physical punishment is only one layer. Surveillance may be even more exhausting because it stretches across the whole day. An overseer watches from horseback. A mistress notices expressions inside the house. A patrolman questions movement on the road. A neighbour reports what he thinks he heard. A white child repeats something spoken in a cabin doorway. Even enslaved people placed in positions of limited authority, such as drivers, may be pushed to monitor others under threat themselves. The plantation creates a world where privacy is thin, and uncertainty about who sees what becomes its own instrument of control. So you learn to read eyes. Not only the eyes of whites, but everyone's. A quick glance can warn, a long stare can endanger, a lowered face can mean caution, grief, calculation, or simply tiredness. The skill lies in knowing which is which. You study the owner's son when he is home from school, already carrying arrogance like a new hat he's eager to wear. You study the mistress when her mouth tightens, because that may mean extra scrutiny for the women in the house. You study the overseer's posture on horseback, because a still overseer can be more dangerous than a noisy one. Even weather enters these calculations. Heat worsens tempers. Rain delays work and then doubles demand. A poor market price can sour the planter's mood without improving anyone else's. The planter himself may appear less often in the fields, But his power is greater because it extends beyond the immediate moment. He owns not just labour, but future. He can sell, he can mortgage, he can hire out, he can separate spouses, he can take a promising young man and send him downriver. He can punish a woman by threatening her children's security. He can decide that an older person who has given a lifetime of the labour now counts as expense more than value. In Louisiana's sugar parishes, enslaved people were assets on paper as well as workers in flesh, and that meant family life always sat under a financial shadow. Sale is one of the deepest fears. A whipping wounds the body. Sale attacks the structure of life itself. You hear the word in lowered voices because it changes everything. A debt, a bad crop, a death in the planter's family, a marriage settlement, a new purchase, a legal dispute. Any of these can turn human beings into liquid wealth in the owner's mind. New Orleans stands downstream as a market city where enslaved people can be bought and sold with cruel efficiency. And even those who have never seen its auction rooms know enough to dread the road that leads there. The thought of a husband sent away, a mother parted from children, siblings broken apart, or grandparents left behind sits like a hard stone inside daily existence. This fear shapes love itself. People still marry, still attach, still raise children, still invest the heart because human beings do not stop needing one another simply because danger exists. But affection must coexist with risk. A mother looking at her son may also be calculating how old he is, how strong he appears, how the owner has looked at him lately. A woman in love may count not only tenderness, but distance between plantations, the temper of both owners, and whether visits can continue. An older man may speak a grandchild's name more often because names are one of the few possessions no bill of sale can fully erase. Documents contribute their own kind of threat. Inventories, wills, mortgages, account books, sale notices, crop reports, medical bills, sheriff's papers, on the plantation. Paper can decide bodily reality without ever meeting the body. A line in an estate inventory may list men, women, and children beside livestock, wagons, and mules. A debt note may quietly set up a future sale. A newspaper advertisement may describe a runaway with cold precision, reducing a whole person to height, scars, clothing, and suspected destination. The written word is often treated as respectable by those in power. Here it can be as brutal as a lash, just slower and less honest about its violence. One of the more bitter little truths of slavery is that planters like to imagine themselves as guardians of order, while creating constant instability in other people's lives. They praise discipline. They praise paternal management. They praised their own reasonableness over dinner. Then they sold children away from mothers and called it business. The self-deception required is almost impressive in a grotesque sort of way. One suspects some of them would have described a thunderstorm as a bookkeeping issue if it damaged the cane. Authority also enters through time. When to wake, when to eat, when to work, when to stop, when to gather, when to move, when to speak. On a plantation, the clock may not sit in every cabin, but command still divides the day with force. Bells, horns, routines, and repeated punishments train the body to anticipate order before it is spoken. This can be one of the most invasive forms of domination because it reaches inward. You begin waking before the signal. You feel tension on evenings before inspection. You measure distance in how long it would take the overseer to ride from the yard to the far field. The system wants not only labour, but reflex. Religion can be used as part of this shadow too. Some white planters encouraged forms of Christian instruction that stressed obedience, humility, and earthly submission. Select verses were repeated with suspicious enthusiasm. Servants, obey your masters. Be patient. Endure. The message was clear enough. Yet black listeners were not empty vessels. They heard other texts as well. Stories of bondage, liberation, judgment, and a God who sees the oppressed. That is why white authorities sometimes feared unsupervised prayer meetings or emotionally powerful gatherings. They understood, however dimly, that spiritual life might nourish courage rather than compliance. The cabin is not fully safe from surveillance either. A visitor can enter unexpectedly. A search can be ordered. A conversation can be overheard through cracks. Domestic arrangements may be inspected under the language of discipline or health. White women on plantations sometimes exercise significant authority over clothing, food distribution, household order, and punishment within their sphere, even while presenting themselves as gentler than men. Enslaved women knew well that a mistress's displeasure could have practical consequences. Power in the plantation household often wore skirts, carried keys, and spoke sharply. Children grew up under this gaze. That may be one of the saddest things to witness. A small boy knows when to step off the path as a white rider passes. A little girl understands which room in the big house requires silence. A child hears the word sold and goes still. Another learns not to cry loudly during an inspection because attention brings uncertainty. Fear becomes educational. It teaches posture, timing, and caution before it teaches comfort. Historians still argue over how children understood slavery at different ages, but plantation life offered them few illusions for long. Even leisure carries risk. A gathering that grows too large may attract suspicion. A dance may be interrupted. A visit to a spouse on another plantation may require a pass or courage enough to travel without one. A person returning late from fishing or trade may be questioned by patrols. Night itself becomes contested. Darkness can hide movement, but it also sharpens white anxiety. Patrol systems across the slave South existed precisely to reduce black mobility, inspect passes, and reinforce the idea that no road was truly free. Then there is the threat of accusation. To be called insolent, lazy, thieving, lying, disorderly, or rebellious may require almost no evidence beyond a white person's preference in the moment. Character on a plantation is not judged fairly. It is assigned from above. The same silence that protects one person may be called sulking in another. The same exhaustion may be called defiance. This uncertainty is deliberate. Rules that shift keep people off balance. You cannot satisfy a system built to find fault whenever it wishes. A curious detail from some plantation records is how often owners complained that enslaved people were secretive. Of course they did. They had built a world in which honesty could be dangerous. Privacy, guarded speech, and hidden feeling became not moral failings but practical wisdom. The planter called it deceit. The enslaved person called it survival, though perhaps not out loud. Still, the shadow of authority does not extinguish inner judgment. People on the plantation know perfectly well what is unjust even when law says otherwise. They know the difference between order and domination, between discipline and cruelty, between stewardship and theft of human life. That moral clarity can survive under extraordinary pressure. It may not always appear as open protest, because open protest can be fatal. Sometimes it appears as a look exchanged in silence, a prayer spoken in private, a story told to a child with careful emphasis, or a refusal to believe the master's lies about benevolence. The senses record the shadow as much as the mind does. You smell leather and horse sweat and feel your stomach tighten. You hear a boot heel on a gallery and lower your voice. You feel the rough grain of a cabin door under your palm while waiting to learn whether the person approaching brings news, command, or punishment. You see dust rise on the lane behind a rider and know before he arrives that someone's peace is about to be interrupted. Power becomes atmospheric. It enters the body through anticipation, and yet people still live under it rather than inside it completely. That distinction matters. The shadow is vast, but it does not occupy the whole soul. Within its reach, black families still create loyalties, judgments, humour, caution, love, and grief that the plantation cannot fully script. They endure surveillance without becoming identical to what surveillance expects. They fear sale without surrendering attachment. They hear threat without forgetting tenderness. In Louisiana's sugar country in 1855, the overseer's watch, the planter's papers, the mistress's eye, the patrol's road, and the auction's possibility all combine to form a harsh and constant pressure. But as you move through that pressure and feel how it shapes every gesture, you also sense the quiet, stubborn fact that those living beneath this shadow continue to measure one another by a deeper human standard than the plantation ever can. Not every act of resistance looks dramatic enough for a painting. Most of it would disappoint a sculptor. There are no trumpets in these moments, no banners, no crowd gathered in heroic arrangement beneath a sky that understands symbolism. On a Louisiana sugar plantation in 1855, resistance often lives in smaller places, in timing, in concealment, in the careful management of what the master does not know. You begin to see that survival here is not passive. It is active in quiet ways. It studies weakness in the system, however slight, and uses what little room appears. A tool can tell the story, not by speaking, obviously. That would be unnerving, though perhaps satisfying, but by wearing down a little sooner than expected, by being misplaced just long enough to disrupt a task, by receiving a repair that's good enough to pass inspection and poor enough to fail under strain. A hoe handle loosened, a cart peg not seated as firmly as it could be, a knife edge allowed to dull. On a plantation where every minute of labour is measured for output, even a small delay can matter. Such acts are risky, because discovery brings punishment, but they reveal a truth the planter hates. Control is never perfect. This kind of resistance requires judgment. Too much damage draws attention. Too little achieves nothing. The goal is often not open sabotage on a grand scale, but friction. A hesitation introduced into the machine of the day. A lost minute here, an interrupted sequence there. A pace softened just enough that the body gains breath while the overseer notices only fatigue, weather, or bad luck. The plantation values smooth production. The resistant mind learns to create drag. You notice it in the fields first. A row that could have been finished a little faster remains unfinished. Cane bundles are stacked with slight inefficiency, not enough to seem deliberate, but enough to slow loading. Weeding moves according to the supervisor's line of sight rather than the true capacity of the hands doing it. A worker bends low when watched, then straightens when leaves conceal the body. Another takes the long way around a muddy patch and turns caution into a few stolen seconds. Nothing here sounds like rebellion in the language white authority prefers. That is exactly why it works when it does. The body itself becomes an instrument of refusal. Illness may be real. Fatigue is certainly real, yet there are also moments when weakness is performed, protected, or extended because it is the only available shelter. A cough lasts longer in public than in private. A limp appears more sharply when the overseer is near. An older worker draws on age as a shield. A woman slows under the claim of pain that cannot be disproved without indecency or risk. Historians still argue over how often feigned sickness functioned as a regular tactic on plantations, because records naturally tilt toward the owner's suspicion rather than the enslaved person's intention. But whenever work is forced, the boundary between genuine exhaustion and tactical exhaustion becomes extremely useful. Food can become part of resistance too. A garden patch does more than feed hunger. It reduces dependence, even if only slightly. A chicken raised quietly, a fish caught at dusk, greens brought up from a careful plot, a handful of peas dried and saved. All of these place some nourishment outside the planter's direct ration system. That matters because hunger is a tool of control. Every bite produced by your own effort loosens the master's grip by a fraction, not enough to make anyone free, but enough to remind you that life can still be sustained through your own skill. So can knowledge of the land. Black people on Louisiana plantations often knew the local environment in ways planters relied on but never fully mastered. Water levels, hidden paths, marsh edges, tree cover, fishing spots, edible plants, healing herbs, weather signs, the habits of mules, the moods of soil. This practical intelligence shaped work, care, and sometimes escape planning. A man may know exactly which ditch bank stays firm after rain. A woman may know where fever weed grows. A child may know which route behind the cabins avoids the worst mud and keeps small feet quiet. Such knowledge is ordinary on the surface and powerful underneath. You begin to understand that communication itself can hide. A look held 1 second too long, a sentence that sounds innocent while carrying another meaning, a song line chosen for the moment, a hand signal so slight it passes for adjusting cloth. On a plantation, direct speech can be dangerous, especially if it concerns plans, warnings, or forbidden movement, so meaning learns to travel sideways. White observers often mistook this for simplicity, which tells you more about their arrogance than about reality. The enslaved community hears layers. The planter hears only what his imagination allows. Humour is one of those layers, not loud humour. That could invite trouble. Something drier, sharper. A joke that turns the master small without naming him openly. An imitation of a pompous voice once the danger has passed. A remark about how the overseer rides as though the horse took a wrong turn and ended up with him by accident. Tiny laughter follows, quickly swallowed. Yet in that moment the world shifts. Authority becomes absurd rather than sacred. That is not a complete victory, but it is a real one. Gentle mockery can keep the spirit from kneeling even when the body must. There are also hidden refusals of identity. The plantation assigns names, ranks, roles, and descriptions: strong hand, breeding woman, good cook, likely runaway, sound field boy. Such labels flatten people into uses. Resistance sometimes begins by refusing to believe those labels fully. A mother keeps alive the memory of a true family name. An elder repeats kin ties that the ledger ignores. A person stores away a private sense of self untouched by the owner's categories. This interior resistance cannot be weighed or sold, which likely annoyed the slave system more than it knew. Religion can serve here as well. A prayer is not always only a prayer. Sometimes it is a way of preserving moral clarity in a place devoted to corruption. To say that God sees you is to deny the master's claim to total ownership. To believe that injustice will be judged is to reject the plantation's version of order. Spirituals, whispered scripture, and secret meetings could all sustain forms of inner resistance. Not every believer became openly defiant. Of course, faith could console, endure, and submit in some contexts. Yet it could also nourish a private refusal to accept slavery as rightful. The night offers opportunities that daylight denies. A visit to a neighbouring cabin may include more than conversation. News can pass. A plan can be tested in words before anyone risks action in the world. A husband from another plantation may arrive with fresh information from roads, markets, or river landings. Someone returning from an errand might describe patrol routes, local unrest, a cruel trader in the parish, a rumour of sale, a chance for contact. The darkness softens surveillance, though it never removes danger. Sounds carry differently at night. Footsteps matter more. Dog barks can freeze a whole conversation. One of the strongest forms of resistance is simply learning to read. Literacy among enslaved people was restricted, feared, and often punished in the South because reading opens more than books. It opens law, scripture, maps, newspapers, forged passes, names, and ideas the master cannot fully supervise. A person who reads can challenge lies about the wider world. A person who writes can preserve kinship across distance. On plantations, teaching and learning often happened covertly, in fragments, with great caution. A child may memorize letters from a scrap. An adult may be taught at night by someone who knows just a little more. Each word gained is dangerous knowledge. Quirky as it sounds, sewing can also become resistance. Not because a hem is revolutionary by itself, though it may feel heroic after a 14-hour day, but because sewing allows concealment, alteration, and preservation. A pocket can hide a scrap of paper, a coin, a charm, a seed, a fishhook, a bit of tobacco, a keepsake. Clothing can be adapted for movement. baby clothes can be made from salvaged cloth rather than dependence on issue. Needlework keeps a degree of domestic power in hands the plantation intended only for service. It is a modest technology of self-help, and modest things often matter most. Resistance may also look like care. That is easy to overlook if you define opposition only as attack. On a slave plantation, every effort to keep one another alive pushes against the system's deepest logic. Treating an illness with skill, sharing food, warning someone of danger, watching another woman's child while she works, helping an elder finish a task, keeping a couple connected across distance, teaching a child caution without teaching despair. All of these preserve human life against a regime organized to consume it. Care is therefore not separate from resistance. It is one of its most durable forms. Then there are the moments of direct disobedience. A pass is ignored, a command answered too slowly, an extra hour is taken on the road, a person disappears briefly into woods or swamp to gain relief, contact kin, hunt, fish, or simply breathe outside constant supervision. Some return before dawn, some are caught, some are whipped, some manage it repeatedly. The line between truancy, maroonage, and simple necessity can blur in local practice. Not every temporary absence is an escape attempt, but every unauthorized movement asserts something precious. My body can still go where you did not send it. Larger escape remains in the realm of possibility too, though in Louisiana, sugar country, it is frighteningly difficult. The terrain can help and harm. Swamps conceal, but they also exhaust and sicken. Rivers carry, but they are watched. Patrols move. White neighbors ask questions. Dogs can track. Market towns are dangerous. And yet people still run, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs, sometimes toward kin, toward cities, toward free soil, toward no clear destination except away. The number who succeeded, failed, hid for a time, or were captured again cannot fully measure the courage involved in deciding to try. There is scholarly uncertainty around how best to interpret everyday resistance. Some historians emphasize its importance as a constant challenge to plantation efficiency and authority. Others caution that small acts, while meaningful, did not always add up to organized opposition or structural change. Both views hold part of the truth. Daily resistance rarely toppled slavery by itself. But it did preserve dignity, steal time, disrupt discipline, and remind the enslaved that total submission had not been achieved. In a system obsessed with complete control that mattered immensely, the senses noticed these acts in strange ways. A cartwheel left unrepaired squeaks differently on the lane. A field row progresses with suspicious unevenness. A hidden fish smells delicious in a pot after dark. A folded note feels crisp and alarming against the skin. A whispered joke disappears into the warm night air. A secret pocket brushed by your fingers confirms that some things are still yours to arrange. Resistance is often tactile, audible, local. It lives in the material world, not only in ideas. Children learn some of this without being formally told. They learn when to stay silent, when to carry a message exactly, how to appear ordinary while paying close attention, which adults can be trusted with questions, which paths are forbidden and therefore interesting. They absorb the double language of plantation life, the public surface and the private meaning underneath. This is a dangerous education, but also a profound one. It trains caution, memory, and ingenuity at an age when no child should need them. What the planter sees, finally, is never the whole plantation. He sees labour output, tool costs, crop condition, visible obedience, punishments delivered, profits expected. He sees the outside of things, but beneath that surface, Black Americans living under slavery create countless small maneuvers that complicate his power. They withhold enthusiasm, they blur transparency, they keep secrets, they shape one another's chances of surviving body and soul, they preserve values the plantation cannot price, they exploit inattention when it appears, They practice refusal in teaspoons because gallons would be fatal, and that is why the sugar world never rests as securely as it pretends. Its machinery may grind, its ledgers may balance, its overseers may ride with confidence, yet every day within the fields, cabins, gardens, roads, and darkened yards, there are hands adjusting the burden, minds testing limits, mouths speaking in layered ways, and hearts declining to hand themselves over completely. As you move through this plantation and notice the hidden intelligence in slowed motions, guarded laughter, mended pockets, quiet warnings, and carefully tended life, you begin to see that resistance here is not an occasional burst, but a constant, low-burning practice by which black Americans in Louisiana in 1855 defend their dignity against a system determined to grind it away. The river carries more than water, it carries talk. On a plantation near the Mississippi in 1855, news does not arrive neatly wrapped and verified like some clerk's packet sealed with certainty. It drifts. It sticks to wagon wheels. It rides in with boat hands, traders, peddlers, hired labourers, visiting kin, market women, enslaved men sent on errands, and white men who talk too freely when they think nobody important is listening. Rumour moves through sugar country the way damp moves through wood, quietly, thoroughly, and with surprising reach. You begin to understand that even on a tightly controlled plantation, the outside world is never completely outside. The landing is one of the great doors. Where the road slopes toward the river, commerce gathers its smells and sounds into a rough kind of music. Wet rope, mud, fish, tar, wood smoke, mule sweat, coffee sacks, molasses barrels, damp cane fibre, men calling to one another over cargo, a plank thudding into place, a steamboat whistle floating across the water with an almost theatrical confidence, as if the vessel considers itself the main character in everyone's life. The riverbank is noisy, but it is also porous. News slips through such places because trade requires movement, and movement weakens silence. Someone comes back from the landing with a detail, not a full account, a detail. A price has fallen. A boat from New Orleans arrived late. A merchant said the sugar market looks uncertain. A patrol stopped 3 men on the road. A child on a neighbouring plantation was sold. A woman heard that fever is bad farther south. A trader mentioned politics in Baton Rouge. A free black man was seen with papers in town. A preacher said the country is arguing about slavery again. Each piece enters conversation with caution, tested by repetition and comparison. On the plantation, information matters because it may change choices. Even bad news is useful if it comes in time. Prices shape the atmosphere more than many enslaved people would have liked, because planter moods and decisions often follow them. If sugar prices are strong, the owner may grow smug, expand operations, buy machinery, boast at table, or purchase more land and people. If prices sag, he may turn sharper, cut corners, talk about debt, threaten sale, or squeeze harder for labour. You do not need to read a market report to feel this. It comes through the body of the plantation. New urgency in the fields, new anxiety in the big house, new counting of barrels. Human beings become more nervous whenever the crop becomes less certain. The cruel joke, of course, is that enslaved people are expected to understand the economics well enough to suffer from them, but not well enough to be considered thinkers about them. And yet many do understand. They know when the planter is worried. They know when a shipment matters. They know that debt can break families as surely as a whip. They know the river is an artery of wealth built partly from their stolen labour. Economic literacy on a plantation may not wear spectacles and carry ledgers, but it is very real. News of sale travels especially fast. It rarely arrives kindly. A trader is seen. A white man measures people with his eyes. The owner has been riding more often to town. A list has been made. A name has been overheard in the yard. A woman hears from a kitchen servant that company is expected. A man sent to the stable notices talk cut short when he enters, Sale begins in rumour before it becomes fact, and rumour alone is enough to steal sleep. You can feel the effect in the cabins. Voices lower. Parents hold children with a little more force. People begin making private calculations they desperately wish were unnecessary. Market towns add another layer to this web of information. Places like New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Donaldsonville, and smaller parish centres gather goods, gossip, law, and danger together. Enslaved people who travel there on errands, by hiring out, or through forced movement, see things that never appear clearly from the plantation lane. They notice the density of free people, the variety of clothing, the speech of sailors, the confidence of traders, the patrols, the churches, the alleys, the advertisements posted in public, the sight of free black people navigating the world with papers and purpose. Even a brief trip can rearrange the imagination. Cities complicate the plantation's lies. The owner would prefer you believe his power is the natural shape of the world, fixed and complete. But towns and river ports reveal variations. There are free black artisans, dock workers, market women, musicians, cart drivers, household servants, and churchgoers moving through urban space under conditions different from plantation slavery, though certainly not free from racism or danger. There are immigrants with accents unfamiliar to parish ears. There are newspapers full of disputes. There are uniforms, officials, debtors, drunks, nuns, gamblers, merchants, and children darting through it all. The wider world appears crowded with possibilities and traps at once. A strange little tidbit from the river world is how much news could cling to cargo itself. A barrel from one place, a crate marked with another city, a newspaper used as wrapping, a merchant stamp, a label from a distant port. Objects travel with traces. A person who cannot read every word may still read enough of the world through marks, routes, and repeated names to know that the plantation is tied to far larger systems of trade. Sugar made here may move to New Orleans, then beyond. Coffee comes in, cloth comes in, iron comes in, news comes in with them all. Political talk also filters through, though often in broken pieces. The 1850s are tense years in the United States, and slavery sits at the centre of that tension, whether white Southerners admit it bluntly or dress it in euphemism. Enslaved people hear references to speeches, elections, territorial disputes, northern criticism, southern rights, and the future of slavery in places far beyond Louisiana. Not everyone hears the same names or follows the same arguments, but many understand the essential point. Powerful white men are fighting over a system that governs black life. The argument is national. The suffering is local. You might hear a white man say that abolitionists are fanatics. Another may grumble that Northerners do not understand Southern property. A boat hand may mention unrest in Kansas. A traveller may refer to speeches in Congress. A priest or preacher may mutter about sectional bitterness. Enslaved listeners gather these fragments carefully. They do not need a full civics education to know when a political win may alter their chances. Hope is dangerous, but ignorance can be deadlier. Historians still debate how much enslaved people on individual plantations knew about national politics in detail, because evidence varies by place, literacy, mobility, and proximity to towns. But there is no serious doubt that many followed broad developments with intense interest. Human beings whose lives depend on a system tend to listen sharply when that system is being argued over in public. One does not need a subscription to understand that one's own cage is under discussion. Rumours of escape circulate too. Not always successful escape. Sometimes attempted, sometimes imagined. A man seen moving at night along the levee. A woman hidden for 3 days in a canebrake. Someone caught in the cypress swamp. Someone believed to have made it north. Someone said to be living under another name in New Orleans. Stories grow in the telling, certainly. Details stretch, shrink, and rearrange themselves. Yet even uncertain stories carry force. They prove that the thought exists widely enough to keep returning. The geography of Louisiana complicates escape talk in fascinating ways. Waterways offer routes, but also exposure. Swamps conceal, but also trap. Boats tempt, but also require timing, contacts, nerve, and luck. The very terrain that helps the sugar economy can hinder or assist those trying to move beyond it. Enslaved people know this terrain intimately. They know where a skiff might be hidden, where dogs lose a scent, where patrols prefer to ride, where a person can disappear for an hour, a day, or maybe longer. Every rumour of flight makes such knowledge feel more alive. There is also news from neighbouring plantations, which may matter more immediately than any speech in Washington. A new overseer has arrived and is worse than the last. A planter has died. A widow now controls an estate. A crop failed in one parish. Disease spreads in another. A driver was punished for protecting a worker. A skilled sugar maker has been hired away. A woman gave birth to twins. A group was marched south in chains. Local news lands with the heaviest weight because its consequences can cross the fence line tomorrow. Religious news spreads along the same channels. A revival meeting drew a great crowd. A black preacher spoke boldly. A Catholic feast day in town brought music and candles. A sermon on Moses stirred strong feeling. A burial was attended by many. An elder known for healing has died. Spiritual life in plantation regions is not isolated from motion. Songs move, prayers move, biblical interpretations move. So do warnings about white supervision, patrol suspicion, and which gatherings are safer than others. The soul has its own information network. Women often serve as crucial carriers of rumour and reliable detail, especially through domestic service, market contact, kin ties, and close observation. A house servant may overhear dinner conversation. A laundress may hear comments exchanged over shirts and collars. A woman visiting family on another place may return with layered knowledge disguised as ordinary talk about children or food. Men moving wagons, tending stock, or travelling on plantation business gather other pieces. Children also carry things, sometimes because adults underestimate what they notice. The plantation leaks information through every rank. Not all rumours are true. That is part of the tension. A story arrives glowing with possibility. Emancipation in some place, a law changing, a trader arrested, a ship captain willing to hide runaways, a northern army assembling. Then the story softens, distorts, or vanishes under scrutiny. Disappointment is its own burden. Too much belief can leave people exposed. Too little can leave them paralysed. So communities develop methods of testing. Who said it? Where did they hear it? Does another person confirm it? Has anything similar happened before? Skepticism becomes a survival skill, though it never fully defeats longing. You can hear longing in the way people repeat uncertain stories, not with foolishness, with hunger. A man says he heard that some places in the north are full of people who will help if you get there. A woman repeats that a relative in town saw 3 black people dressed fine and moving without passes. Another says a boat hand claimed some white people hate slavery enough to fight over it. No one states too much too firmly. The cost of error is high. Yet the very act of passing along such talk creates a mental map larger than the plantation. It tells the mind there are edges to this world. One curious detail of rumour culture is that silence can itself become news. The owner receives a letter and looks troubled. The mistress's sister visits unexpectedly. The overseer rides farther than usual. A trader leaves without concluding business. The kitchen goes tense after supper in the big house. Sometimes what is not said speaks loudest. Enslaved people learn to read not only statements, but atmospheres. A household can smell of worry as distinctly as it smells of roast meat or lamp oil. The river remains the great symbol of all this movement. In daylight it flashes broad and indifferent, carrying steamboats, rafts, flatboats, driftwood, and wealth past the cane lands. At dusk it darkens and seems to hold its secrets closer. The sound changes with distance from shore. Near the bank you hear slaps against pilings, rope strain, insect hum, and the murmur of men working cargo. Farther off comes the low pulse of engines and a whistle fading into mist. For enslaved people, the river is both threat and invitation. It transports sugar to market. It also brings the world near enough to overhear. In the cabins at night, after work and cooking and caution, these fragments of worldliness settle into conversation. People compare what they have heard. They weigh risk. They imagine futures with extraordinary discipline, keeping hope low enough not to attract danger and alive enough not to suffocate. Children half asleep absorb names of places they have never seen. Elders measure fresh rumour against old experience. The air smells of ash, damp cloth, and something simmering quietly in a pot. Outside, frogs call from the ditches. Somewhere beyond the fields, the river moves in darkness, carrying boats, goods, arguments, and possibilities. And that is perhaps the most important thing rumour gives. Possibility, not certainty, not rescue, not easy comfort, but the steady reminder that the plantation is not the whole world, that markets fluctuate, owners fail, laws change, boats come and go, cities pulse with life, strangers speak carelessly, kin remember one another across distance, and power itself is not fixed in stone simply because it stands armed on a lane today. As you listen to the talk moving through Louisiana's sugar country in 1855, through landings, roads, kitchens, wagons, quarters, and whispered exchanges after dark, you can feel how black Americans surviving this harsh world keep one ear on immediate danger and the other turned outward, toward the river's restless stream of news, searching every rumour for warning, leverage, and the faint shape of freedom. Night settles over the plantation with a softness the place has not earned. The cane fields darken first, their tall rows losing detail until they become black masses under the Louisiana sky. The paths between cabins turn silver in spots where moonlight reaches them and vanish entirely where trees or sheds interrupt the glow. The mill, if active, still sends up a dim orange pulse from its fires, along with smoke that drifts flat when the air is heavy. If the works are quiet, the silence feels almost suspicious, as though the whole estate is briefly holding its breath. Either way, darkness changes the plantation. It lowers the visible edge of the white supervision, but it does not remove it. Instead, the night fills with another kind of awareness. You lie down, and the body speaks at once. Feet throb first, then calves, then the low back with its deep familiar ache. Cuts from cane leaves sting again when sweat dries into them. Shoulders pulse from lifting. Hands feel swollen, the fingers reluctant to uncurl after gripping tools. Buckets, handles, children, pots, and whatever else the day demanded. Your skin still carries the smell of smoke, soil, syrup, and warm cloth. The pallet under you is thin, the blanket rough. The air inside the cabin may be close and damp, or cool enough in certain months to make you tuck your knees upward for warmth. Rest begins, but comfort does not arrive all at once. The cabin holds many sounds: a child turning in sleep, someone breathing through a stuffed nose, a cough from the far corner, the small crackle of banked coals, a whisper too low to catch, cloth shifting against straw, a mouse in the wall if misfortune wishes to remain sociable. Outside, the night insects begin their steady music, layered and endless. Frogs answer from wet ground. Somewhere farther away a dog barks, then another, and every adult in earshot notices that sound differently from a child. A barking dog can mean nothing. It can also mean movement, patrols, a stranger on the road, or trouble approaching with boots on. Your mind does not sleep as quickly as your muscles wish. That is one of slavery's quieter cruelties. Even when the labouring body collapses, the mind keeps watch. Did the overseer look too long at your son today? Did the mistress ask too many questions about the young girl in the house? Did someone at the landing mention traders coming upriver? Is the cough in the next bed ordinary or dangerous? Will the rain hold off long enough for the cane to be cut? Is there enough meal left for tomorrow night? Will the child stop growing just long enough for the shoes to last another month? The mind walks these questions in circles because there is no safe answer to settle on. Sometimes you stare upward into darkness and imagine the cabin roof as if it were not there. Beyond it lies the sky, broad and mostly indifferent, though people have always looked at stars for comfort when the ground gives little. The same moon shines on the river, on New Orleans, on other plantations, on people sleeping in better houses and on others sleeping in no shelter at all. That thought can be bitter. It can also be strangely enlarging. The world remains wider than the field rows. The plantation cannot fence the heavens, however much it might enjoy trying. You begin to notice how night gathers thought around people. Words spoken after dark carry a different weight from those said in daylight. A mother may speak more honestly when children seem asleep, though the children often hear more than adults realize. A man may confess fear in a whisper he would never allow himself at noon. An elderly woman may tell a story not simply to entertain, but to plant steadiness in younger minds. The dark makes listeners of everyone. It also makes memory stronger. Things said at night often stay. Stories matter here. Not grand speeches, but the stories that hold life together. A tale about kin in another parish. A memory of a father who could build anything from almost nothing. A woman remembering how her mother cured fever with herbs and patience. A story from long ago about crossing water, whether that water was an ocean in family memory, a river in a personal one, or a flood that remade a whole season. Black life on this plantation is full of such remembered fragments, and the night is when they settle into shape. History in the cabins is not arranged by scholars. It is arranged by need. Children drift between sleep and listening. A little boy, half conscious under a patched blanket, hears the names of towns and thinks of them as almost magical. A girl notices the sadness in an adult voice before she understands the details. An older child pretends to sleep while storing away every warning about roads, white moods, and the meaning of certain silences. In this way, the plantation passes on one education, while the people living under it pass on another. The first teaches obedience, the second teaches endurance, judgment, and the limits of obedience when dignity is at stake. The smells of night are different from the smells of day. The cabin cools enough for ashes to dominate over cooking. Damp earth rises outside. River mud sometimes sends its heavy scent across the low country. If the mill is running, the sweetness from boiled cane drifts faintly through the darkness, mixed with soot. If laundry hangs nearby, cloth carries the clean, dull smell of rinsed cotton, hair grease, herbs, old wood, tobacco, milk on an infant's breath, wet shoes drying by embers. All of these shape the air. Night on a plantation is never scentless. It is simply more intimate in what it reveals. In these hours, grief becomes easier to feel. Daylight is full of tasks. Night allows sorrow to come sit down. You think of people missing from the cabin, from the row of cabins, from the parish. A father sold years ago, a sister sent south, a child buried too small. A wife on another plantation visited only when chance and courage align. An elder whose stories now exist only in the mouths of others. Grief under slavery is rarely clean because loss is so often unfinished. No burial closes a sale. No prayer dissolves uncertainty about the living. Many black families in the antebellum South lived with absences that were neither fully explained nor fully repairable. That kind of grief hangs in the room like humidity. You do not always mention it. You breathe it anyway. Yet the night also sharpens affection. In the dark, a hand finds another hand more deliberately. A mother draws a child closer without waking fully. Two people lying side by side share warmth, breath, and the comfort of one familiar body in a world arranged by force. Someone rises quietly to check on the sick. Someone adjusts a blanket over an elder's legs. These gestures are small and nearly silent, but they say what the plantation most hates to hear. You are not alone. You belong to one another in ways ownership cannot explain. There is a curious little truth about exhaustion. It can make the ordinary feel sacred. A cup of water in the night, a cooler breeze through a crack in the wall, the chance to stretch both legs at once, a quiet child, a roof that does not leak this evening. These are not luxuries in theory, but the body receives them as gifts after relentless labour. On a sugar plantation, where so much is taken, the smallest relief can shine with surprising intensity. One suspects that people with easier lives often miss half the mercy in the world, simply because they have never had to measure it so precisely. Somewhere beyond the cabins, white people sleep too. The owner in a larger bed, the mistress beneath finer linens, the overseer perhaps snoring off bad temper and worse morals. The contrast is real and cannot be softened, yet darkness equalizes certain sounds if not certain conditions. Rain hits all roofs, frogs call for everyone, thunder startles rich and poor alike. The differences return instantly in the morning, of course, but at night nature sometimes behaves with more fairness than society does. Weather remains one of the great companions of sleepless thought. You listen for it. Wind through cane sounds different from wind through trees. Rain beginning on the roof can mean temporary cooling, muddy misery tomorrow, or some deeper trouble with fields and ditches. Thunder rolling far away may promise relief or ruin, depending on timing. Louisiana nights can feel very large when storms are building. The air presses against the skin, lightning flickers at the window. For a moment the cabin is fully illuminated, faces, rafters, pots, blankets. Then darkness returns as quickly as if nothing had happened. That flash can feel like a strange kind of truth. 1 second of seeing everything. Dreams are not simple here. Some are ordinary, born of fatigue and repetition. Tools, rows, kettles, bells. Some are full of fear, dogs, pursuit, drowning mud, the crack of punishment, the sound of someone calling a name that cannot be answered in time. Some are impossible gifts, a road north, a child grown safely, a mother restored, a field no one is forced to cut, a house that belongs to the people inside it. Enslaved people often took dreams seriously, sometimes as spiritual signs, sometimes as warnings, sometimes as the only place where the heart could wander without a pass. Historians still disagree about how to interpret the role of dreams in enslaved communities, but nobody doubts they mattered. Religion returns again in the night, a whispered prayer from a pallet, a verse mouthed from memory, a quiet appeal to God not for abstract blessings, but for highly specific mercies. Let the child's fever break. Let there be no trader. Let the river carry good news. Let tomorrow pass without the overseer's rage. Let the absent be protected wherever they are. These prayers are practical because suffering is practical. Theology can become very straightforward when your life is ruled by other people's power. Help us, keep us, see us. There are also nights when people plan, not always escape, sometimes simply survival. Who will tend the child if the mother is called early to the house? How to stretch the meal? Which woman will sit with the sick neighbour tomorrow evening? Whether the older boy can be trusted with an errand? Which route to take when visiting kin? Whether the garden can spare a few greens for another family? Where to hide a coin? How to answer if questioned? These plans are not dramatic, but they are full of agency. The plantation governs much, yet people inside it never stop organising life on their own terms where possible. The body slowly loosens as the night deepens. Pain remains, but it spreads out enough to live beside. Breathing settles. The cabin grows quieter. Even the insects seem to recede into a more distant layer of sound. Moonlight shifts on the floor. Ash cools toward grey. If the mill is stopped, the silence left behind can feel almost enormous. If it continues, the far-off throb of machinery becomes a kind of dark heartbeat for the estate, unpleasant and inescapable. Either way, sleep comes in pieces, thin but necessary. A final truth settles in these hours. The plantation believes the day is its main instrument. Labour, surveillance, punishment, profit. Yet night reveals something the daylight cannot fully contain. In darkness, stripped of performance and command, the real measure of life appears more clearly. People ache, people grieve, people remember, people touch one another gently, people pray, people imagine. People make room for small hopes that would look foolish in a ledger and powerful in any honest account of human survival. So as you lie here in Louisiana in 1855, with the smell of ash in the cabin, the distant river moving beyond the cane, the rough blanket against your skin, and the weight of another uncertain morning waiting outside the door, you understand that survival on the harshest sugar plantations is not made only of labour endured. It is made also of what the night protects for a few fragile hours: memory, sorrow, tenderness, guarded thought, shared warmth, and the stubborn interior life of black Americans who are denied freedom in law yet continue, even here, to live as feeling, judging, loving human beings beneath the vast indifferent stars. The night grows quieter now. The cabin settles deeper into stillness, and the darkness feels less like a threat than a coverlet pulled softly over the bruised edges of the day. Outside, the cane stands motionless in the damp air, no longer a field to be cut or crossed, only a dark shape resting beneath moonlight. The insects keep their patient music. Far away, the river continues its slow journey, carrying boats, weather, and unseen possibilities through the sleeping land. You let your thoughts become gentler. The aches in your hands and back are still there, but they no longer demand every corner of attention. Breath moves in and out. The smell of cooled ash, worn cloth, and night air becomes familiar, almost soothing, somewhere nearby. Another sleeper exhales, and the sound is comforting in its plainness. It reminds you that rest, however brief, is shared. No one drifts alone in this darkness. The sky above the cabin remains wide, even when hidden by roof and rafters. Stars continue their quiet work. The moonlight shifts a little, then softens. The world does not become fair at night, but it does become slower, and in that slowing there is a measure of peace. The heart loosens. The mind stops circling every fear. Even sorrow grows quieter, like a voice stepping back from the doorway. So you rest here, held for a moment between earth and sky, between memory and sleep, between hardship and the small mercy of stillness. The plantation, with all its noise and cruelty, fades at the edges. What remains is the softness of darkness, the closeness of human breath, and the deep calm of a night that asks nothing from you now except to close your eyes. Let the shadows blur and drift gently at last into sleep. End of script. Sleep well.